Welcome to episode 60 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast with Dick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and this week it is the end of the Sir Doug Nicholls Rounds with Dreamtime, obviously on the Friday night, capitalising on the event, of course, the traditional clashes between Essendon and Richmond. Of course, we go into the Bailey Smith game as well that opens the round, which was very interesting. We will talk about that straight up. And a couple of other games that really kind of caught our attention, even though we're both so busy during the weekend. But regardless of that, how are you doing, Mr. Psyrick?
Not too bad, not too bad. I wasn't actually that busy. I was just, a lot of them were a bit, not that interesting. But still a lot to talk about. I did get boots on ground. I hope you appreciated the rare Psyrick social.
I did.
I don't know I think it's actually the first time I've ever made a story on the fly. So, so I got a few photos from that. It was a really good, because I think it's the first time I've been to Sir Doug Nicholls Round.
Yes.
At a stadium. They had Jeff White. Jeff Farmer doing the coin toss. Really good to see him. I got him fairly involved, and he seemed very happy to be there. I think he went back to Melbourne for a while, so he wasn't really involved much in Freo, but good to see him there. On top of the Optus Stadium roof, they normally have a guitarist playing, and with him was someone on the didgeridoo.
Love
It
that.
sounded very awesome. Great reverberation. It was just very nice for the stadium. And even though it was very wet, it was very dour. And obviously, you probably know the result. Yartapuulti got pumped
Yes.
by Walyalup.
Indeed.
That's Port vs Freo. I still enjoyed it. Like, Optus Stadium, it's very hard to have a really bad time there. As long as you don't run into unsavory fans, which, again, with Freo, I have had very good experience with their fan base. So, overall, not a bad weekend, even though football-wise, things didn't go quite to plan.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, to be fair with Freo fans, all they know is misery because they still haven't won a grand final. So they have to. They can only be positive.
They're a very realist group. They know they're not too far away from the bottom. The bottom is never as far away from the top as it feels.
Correct. That's well, considering that's where both of our teams are at the moment. It feels very accurate. As you may have seen on the socials, Psyrick was out with boots on ground, but I, on the other hand, was indoors at Fortress Melbourne hosting our Melbourne Mash Overwatch LAN tournament. Thank you to anyone who may have shown up from our little community here to that. It was an awesome experience. It was great to see a bunch of creator friends and work on the actual broadcast. I can maybe put the link to the VOD if anyone wants to check that out down in the description of the YouTube video and the Spotify post. If anyone is curious. Otherwise, it will be all up on my socials as well if you want to go check that out. It was an awesome time, which means I didn't really get to see too much of the footy over the weekend because I was very busy working on that. But that did not stop me from at least watching Thursday night's game, which we will jump straight into, which is Geelong and the Western Bulldogs.
Yeah, and this one was a treat to watch. By far and away the match of the round. I normally have my stream with my friend that I do. So I only caught the last quarter live, but I went back and watched through the first 3 quarters, and it was pretty entertaining.
I mean, to be fair for me, I was at my usual sea shanty night, so I watched this all on my phone. So I didn't have any audio for it, but I still watched it, and it was pretty exhilarating.
Well, this was probably the one good because there weren't too many lapses in play. You weren't just zoning into a boring screen, but despite the recent lapses at home, this was played at Goomba from Geelong.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to work their way out of the forward half press of the Bulldogs enough time to convert truly. The Dogs had their forward press going, but Geelong eventually broke through it, and with good conversion, did get a solid lead at times. But I think throughout the night, the Bulldogs always looked threatening, and it was just one of those things where Geelong just held them a bit. It was just enough.
Yeah.
There were signs early on that the matchups would influence this game. Oish and Mullen effectively tagged Ed Ridgetts for a quarter. and there were a lot of intercept marks for how little turnovers there were in this game. But everything sort of broke loose, and players for Geelong and Bulldogs are like Cameron Richards, who I mentioned earlier, Shannon Neal, Matt Soames, Bailey Smith. I was about to say Sam Smith. I don't know if Sam Smith could play football. Emma Kennedy. They're running around and dictating the game how they please.
That's right.
Yeah. So as I said, movement, fast pace was the main thing about this game. And the killer thing was how Geelong were moving the ball after an interception. So 1 in 5 intercepts for the night for Geelong led to a goal, which I found very impressive. They mustered the long kick to space an advantage, whilst just holding up Bulldogs when their aggressive kicks didn't pan out themselves.
Yeah, it was one of those nights where they were able to not really have to play short. Like, both teams were able to make long kicks, take up like a lot of front on space, and even if it was only to a one-on-one contest, like a lot of that happened. And to both of their credits, like they managed to use the space that they had extremely well.
Yeah, it's like not like the Bulldogs weren't moving the ball all that well themselves. It was really just when they actually got into the forward half. And this is not to say that weren't that effective, but as I mentioned, and what I'm going to mention in a second, Geelong just did that tiny bit, it was just that tiny bit that got them the win. Because I face it in this is like, how do you defend in a game that cares so little about defense? Obviously, you can tell from the scoreline, which was, I haven't forgot it, although I did, 27, 127, the Cats, and 16, 17, 113, the Dogs. And you think, 17 behinds, the Bulldogs sort of kicked themselves out of the game, but it wasn't actually the case. The Bulldogs actually, they did miss some gettable ones, but it was really the fact that Geelong restricted them to 11 set shots. And I think they scored like 8-3 from them. But the ones that they did force were the inaccurate, low percentage, and high general play shots. That's the reason why the Bulldogs didn't kick that straight, is because they had to take less than optimal shots.
Yeah.
Because they weren't getting as deep entries. Whereas Geelong, they had a lot more gettable set shot kicks, and they kicked 12-2 from them. Sometimes, they always say, good kicking's good football. But a lot of the times it just really depends where you get your marks and your shots. And Geelong just had better options through some slightly more piercing entries. Whereas the Bulldogs definitely had their forward half set up and definitely had enough for a win against most teams. It's just, the fact that Geelong were playing absolutely beautifully. And in the end, the only real difference at the end was, the Bulldogs looked like they were coming back. And then I think it was Shannon Neal and I think maybe Jeremy Cameron kicked one as well. Getting some nice goals on the run that just gave them a bit of separation. Very impressive game. Clearance dominance from the Bulldogs was the reason why they were keeping up so much. They did have their forward half going. And as Blaze will say, say in a moment, had some very good midfielders having some excellent games.
They really did.
And yeah, as I said, their handball chains to break out of pressure were very clean. And, I think that I was meant to say in the back half, they were choosing the handball a bit more. I think that was like an adjustment made from the first or second quarter that I noticed a bit. And it meant that Geelong were getting less interceptions to work with. And as I mentioned, even though Geelong didn't let those entries get deep, like the Bulldogs were working very hard to get those shots. Their ground ball work was absolutely fantastic. It's just because they were a bit further up, because Geelong just did enough. A few more just went through behinds, then into the goals, and they end up losing by a fraction. Not much in this game at all.
No, it was extremely hotly contested. Both teams very, very even, pretty much across the board. It was whilst, you can say that, they did kind of kick themselves out of 70 behinds, but because there was such difficult shots to make because of Geelong's forward pressure or defensive pressure in that case, like it's not entirely to the not entirely the Dogs' fault when Geelong are pressuring them so well in that half.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, it's one of those ones where because you only remember the few times. I think there was about 3 I remember. One of the posters that should have been slotted through, and a couple of others.
There were
the
a
ones that the
little too
Bulldogs
many that
remember.
hit the post during that game.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
I mean,
but,
at least we know the Dogs can hit a target. It's just not the right target.
yeah, exactly. Just that big fat stick in the middle. Yeah. Oh, sorry. The Bulldogs kicked 8-3 from set shots.
There you go.
From 11. I think I said 8-3 actually. I can't remember. But
You said something pretty close
so
to
it was
it.
21 general play shots for 8-12 and a fair few rush behinds.
Yeah, so, that's about right.
Yeah. I think the only other thing I wanted to say was, to the point about the post. I don't know if you saw the either Reddit or Facebook post or Blue Sky of how what was it? The Bulldogs had 3 or 4 games where they've gotten 5 or more posters.
Yeah,
and the next best is 3 for a game, which is pretty ridiculous.
Shows that they know how, again, as I just said, they know how to hit a target, just not the right one.
Yeah, well, as I said, it's better than last few years. Like, it really feels like their forward conversion has actually improved, and yet they still get enough behinds anyway. It's a bit, I know it's paradoxical, but they have improved a lot in terms of forward efficiency.
They have. They're not as
losing key players,
inconsistent as they were last season. Let's just put it like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Jumping over to our individuals, someone who can hit a target and hit it well is Jeremy Cameron. He was a lead-up forward, kicking 6 goals from 14 disposals. 12 of them were effective, equating to 85.7% efficiency. 8 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 4 inside 50s, 9 score involvements, and 3 1%ers. Sam de Koning was very important down in defence. He finished with 12 touches, 9 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 4 marks, 7 pressure acts, 10 1%ers, and 10 spoils. And dubbed the Bailey Smith game, I had to mention him. Bailey Smith himself put on an absolute show against his old side. He collected 33 disposals, 12 contested possessions, 4 marks, 7 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 7 score involvements, 7 tackles, 25 pressure acts, 10 ground ball gets, and 810 meters gained. Jumping over to the Dogs, Matt Kennedy showed once again why he was such an important signing for them. He kicked 3 goals from 25 touches, 20 of them effective, according to 80% efficiency. 11 contested possessions, 4 marks, 4 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 12 score involvements, 4 tackles, 12 pressure acts, and 411 meters gained. Then Ed Richards also impressed through that midfield, kicking 2 goals from 28 disposals, 19 contested possessions, 8 inside 50s, 10 clearances, 3 goal assists, 8 score involvements, 7 tackles, 16 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, 10 ground ball gets, and 547 meters gained. Jumping over to the MRO really quick, because thankfully there were no injuries from this game. And Bailey Smith, what a surprise. He was also fined, and it was for contact with an umpire. I was praying that there wasn't going to be one this week, but there were a couple. And Bailey Smith is last week, the first. Yeah. I know.
Yeah, not even some fake tension on this one, just getting it out straight away. But yeah, not too much more I want to mention on this game. But I will say, because I've been on the Ed Richard bandwagon for a long time, but it almost miffs me a bit. Like last year, absolutely fantastic on the wing, also playing a bit off halfback. I thought he was nearly All-Australian, if not deserved to be in conversation, but everyone looked over him. Goes into the midfield and gets numbers that is, are still very impressive, but you know what I mean? And all of a sudden it's All-Australian.
I mean, I always rated him. I always thought it was great, but I think last year it was because he was out a fair bit with injury. Is probably why he was overlooked. Because I remember him being out for like a solid chunk.
I think he's still got 20.
I can't remember. I know he missed some notable games though, so that might have been why he was possibly overlooked. But yeah, this season he's been incredible. Like him and Matt Kennedy running through that midfield alongside Bontempelli, alongside Liberatore, Treloar now that he's back as well. Like,
it's a very hard midfield.
Like that's an insanely strong midfield.
Yeah. As I said,
Not to
I'm
mention you've
still
still got like,
convinced that
Bailey
it's
Dale as well. You've still got
yeah.
um
I mean, he might as well be a
Riley
midfielder off
West.
halfback.
Like
Yeah.
it's a really interesting midfield to watch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, as I said, it's just one of those things. Yeah, he played 21 games last year. You're thinking of 23, where he
Oh
played a
yeah,
bit
that's right.
less. Um, but anyway, it doesn't matter too much. But yeah, in terms of Matt Kennedy, I guess I'll mention that. I don't know how much I've harped on about it in the podcast. Some things just glaze over my mind, I will admit. But yeah, again, I know there's been a bit of talk about like his performances and what he would have been doing if he stayed at Carlton, but once again, it's the score involvements that I think really kill it for Carlton because they need a connect player from midfield to forward line.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned that, as I said, they could get Matt Cottrell to do it. He's gotten injured and he didn't quite look as threatening anyway when he was doing that role. But, they've had players in the midfield that have lifted. Hewitt's done all right. Chera's probably had a bit better year than last year, but
Chera has
I don't think it's
improved.
actually resulted to much. And that's the thing. I think of all the things, I think it's his score involvements that they'll miss from Matt Kennedy because yeah, as I said, he just seems lethal, especially with the Bulldogs forward line.
He's
I
such
think
a
that's part of
good
the
transition
reason.
player. And yeah, you're right. That's exactly what
Exactly.
Carlton are missing.
Yeah. And I'll say, like, even just the Bulldogs' accuracy, they're getting better entries, resulting in a bit more conversion than, the more conversion you would expect to see from such a talented
Not to
forward
mention
line.
he can just convert himself from like 50 out. Like he doesn't need to pass it over to someone in the forward line. He can just do it himself.
Probably not 50. He's tried to take a few 50 meters kicked and just fall short, but
I
45 meters out, I
Actually,
would
yeah,
agree.
the kick that was highlighted was 45 out. It was close enough though. Like,
Yeah.
give him some credit.
He wants him. He wants him. He's just a bit short on that distance sometimes. But yeah, I know what you mean. He can kick goals himself
Yeah.
at a fairly decent rate.
Yeah, that's right. All right, let's jump over to our next game, being the highlights, the big marquee game of the Sir Doug Nicholls rounds, and that is Dreamtime,
Mm.
hosted by Essendon this time around against Richmond.
Yeah, I mean, you say marquee, but unfortunately, just where the two teams are, it wasn't too much hype around this game.
No, it really
Um,
wasn't.
yeah, but at the same time, in terms of the game itself, it wasn't too bad. Very dour affair. Very high amount of turnovers. Um, but as I said, and also with some the injuries as well.
Mm.
Things just keep on getting tough for them. But they did turn a tightly fought game into a solid victory with a very impressive last quarter against a fairly gassed Richmond. I'm not going to talk about the game too much, but it was 11-15-81 to 8-10-58.
Mm-hmm.
But it was close at three-quarter time. Yeah, as I said, it was sort of a nil-all draw in terms of like overall transition and scores off turnover. Probably the two main ways you just generate. That isn't just stoppage work. So, it was really Essendon's overwhelming centre and stoppage dominance, leading to minor gains, throughout most of the night. But at the end of the day, they sort of ran over Richmond at the end. I think they just got a bit gassed. They got a bit more conversion when they went forward. And as I said, that territory advantage, it just took a while to actually turn into score. But in terms of the other way, because Richmond were getting enough inside 50s, yeah, as we mentioned in the preview, the lack of key targets was what killed it for Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
They only managed one shot inside 30 meters for the entire game, which was actually the opening snapshot from Timmy Taranto. Absolutely brilliant goal, probably one of the goals of the year.
Potentially the goal of the year. It has been nominated.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, um, yeah, and they only managed. I want to check this again, but I've written two set shots for the entire match inside 50, which probably is correct.
I'm pretty sure that's
For one goal,
correct.
nothing. Yeah, it was not much. Yeah, so 7 set shots all up. But as I said, 2 goals inside 50 and 1 direct miss. Everything else was roughly outside. So again, it's very hard to actually convert when that happens.
Mm.
Essendon didn't dominate in the air or key players, except for, of course, the exciting debut of Angus Clark. You'll touch on it in a second. But because they got their entries deeper, they managed to get the ball to ground, where the ground ball pressure, is their bread and butter. Managed 17 general play shots, and a lot of those were near the goal face. Otherwise, as I said, the only thing to mention is Richmond did actually have some nice movement at times. Not too much restriction in movement for the entire game, but at least Richmond capitalised off that. And I thought the Ralph Smith-Mansell provided a lot of wing forward connection, despite it being a very low scoring game.
Yeah, it was
it felt like a lot of the scores were generated from those 2 players.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It was very, it was a wet game. I don't think it rained during the match, but it definitely rained beforehand. So like it was definitely a bit wet, a bit slippery, so it makes sense for it to be a low scoring game anyway. But yeah, like us Richmond having no tall forward targets with Lynch out, and we don't really have anyone ready like to be able to present properly in that position. Like other than like we have Sims, but it's what I mentioned when we previewed it last week, is that like who Lynch takes the number 1 defender in this case being Ben Mackay, right? We need Lynch there, even if he doesn't really do much, to just take the number 1 defender away from Sims, away from Campbell, so they're able to have an impact. But if we don't have someone like Lynch to take that number 1 defender, he's just gonna, even though, he's not the best defender out there, Ben Mackay, he's able to out-muscle and out-pressure such a young, tall forward line. So it's just there's no way for a team like Richmond's, especially with our forward line, to be able to do anything up forward, because you don't have targets when they're just going to get out-muscle each time.
Yeah, exactly. And, as you mentioned, like, it's not even just the pure marking, because, again, that's going to be tough anyway. But as I said, the real difference between the Bombers and the Tigers was bringing the ball to ground. Because, as I said, like, that's the only real way that Richmond were looking to score, and they could still only manage 12, and they were from very tough positions. Like we were talking about the Bulldogs game, you're looking at a similar sort of degree of toughness for shots. And to be honest, it's very weird. They actually converted well, considering where they took the shots, which is insane to say about, what was it, like a 8-7 score. You're only just batting above level, but they really didn't get it all that much. It was just, it was very much just not getting the ball deep enough. And, as I said, it's not that the ball didn't actually go deep. It did go there, but Essendon either took the intercept mark, or more often than not, just spoiled it forward. They had the crumbers on ground level because it was such a clear spoil. And as I mentioned, they just dominated ground level and stoppages. So it was very hard to keep the ball trapped in their forward half. They just really didn't get it enough.
Their defensive midfielders and their entire defensive team really, really overworked themselves just to make sure that Richmond couldn't score, especially in that second half, where Richmond were trying for a hard fight back, but just couldn't get anything going.
Yeah, because it wasn't even... I don't think Richmond were even that defensively poor either. It's just, as I said, I don't think on ground level they were quite at Essendon's level, because we know Richmond favour the taller style matchups than some of the smalls. So,
it's very much a direct opposite to how our play style used to be.
Yeah, so it's like, I didn't even think they were that beaten. It was just, as I said, it was more just the weight of numbers. And
Essendon were coming off of a 6-day break. We were coming off of a 5-day break. So it was expected for us to run out of legs as well in that fourth quarter.
You live in Melbourne, I wouldn't be too...
It's the whole reason Nankervis didn't play. So it makes a difference.
I mean, not so much on ground level play, but I mean, it makes a bit difference.
Generalized, especially when we're such a young team.
Yeah.
Like, they're still building their tanks.
Yeah, I know. I'm only pulling your chain.
Yeah, I know. Nothing wrong with an explanation, though.
Yeah, no. I'll go for it. I mean, defend your team. I always got to do it. I think I might have some defending to do later on in the podcast.
Oh, yes,
I don't know if I'll
will.
actually do it. But yeah, let's go to the individual players now.
Yes, starting with, as you mentioned just before, debutant Angus Clark. I was going to have to mention him anyway, being a debutant, but he impressed immensely. Guaranteed he's probably going to win Rising Star. I haven't checked it yet, so we'll check that momentarily. But he was so good, kicking 3-1 from 16 disposals, 11 of them effective, equating to 68.8% efficiency, 3 contested possessions, 8 marks, with 3 of them inside 50, 6 inside 50s, 8 score involvements, 11 pressure acts, 522 meters gained. Yukon Award winner Nick Martin was absolutely solid off of halfback. His run and pace was so good out of that defensive line. He kicked 2 goals with 35 touches, 29 effective, equating to 82.9% efficiency. 12 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 9 marks, 8 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 10 score involvements, 8 tackles, 21 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, 9 ground ball gets, and 6 60 meters gained. And then veteran Todd Goldstein went out against Samson Ryan, my goat. Sadly, I don't know if he's got much more in an AFL career, at least with us. But I appreciate that he's still trying to get opportunities, but it's not looking great.
Nah.
But Goldie got 38 hitouts, 14 to advantage, and 11 disposals, all of them effective, so 100% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 8 clearances, 9 score involvements, 10 pressure acts, 6 1%ers, and 6 spoils. I know this has already been mentioned by the media a fair amount, but for those who haven't seen, Richmond player Thomas Sims was born in 2006. Veteran Todd Goldstein was recruited to an AFL level in 2006.
Actually happened twice this weekend. Callum Ward.
Yes.
And might have been Fonte. Maybe it was another.
I can't remember. There was definitely a couple.
Anyway.
But yeah, so there's an interesting little number for you. Over on the Richmond side, Jacob Hopper has been a solid workhorse in the midfield all season long. Honestly, I think he's been probably our most consistent player so far this season, apart from maybe Sam Banks. Tom Brown's also been really good. Some of our younger players. But he finished with 23 touches, 13 contested possessions, 5 inside 50s, 9 clearances behind, 5 score involvements, 5 tackles, 70 pressure acts, 8 ground ball gets, and 470 meters gained. And then Hugo Ralphsmith, my boy, he put in some great effort on the wing, kicking 2-1 from 17 disposals, 8 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 4 marks, 5 inside 50s, 5 score involvements, 4 tackles, 16 pressure acts, 8 ground ball gets, and 528 meters gained. Sadly, as you did mention, there was a lot on the injury front for this game, with Kyle Langford going out with a quad strain, Zach Reed with a hamstring strain, Tommy Dow did a knee. I don't think it's an ACL, thankfully, but hopefully it's not too bad. And then Sam Lawler with a hamstring strain as well, so he will probably miss a couple of weeks. Jumping over to the MRO real quick, though.
I was going to say that I don't know if you saw, but there's an update for that because Ben Mackay's in doubt as well.
Yes, that's right. I did see that. So we can add Ben Mackay to that list. I hadn't written it down. But he apparently came out really sore from this game as well. And because I think they have a short break this week too.
It's going to be hard.
Yeah, it's going to be... I think he's just trying to push it out to the bye, but if he's going to be in doubt, you may as well just rest him up until the bye and then go from there.
I think they said they have 7 or 8 90 centimeter plus players on the injury list.
I did read that.
Brutal.
It's rough for them. Which is why I know I probably should get through the MRO first, but I'm going to go on a tangent for this. I either saw it in the other AFL server we're in, or it was somewhere else online. But there's a consideration that if they they have picks for the mid-season draft, which is happening this week for note. They're looking at possibly targeting a tall from Queensland and then getting him to play literally the day after on a Thursday, purely because they're playing up in Queensland. Cool. Because they're that desperate for talls.
Dang. Pretty cool though.
It would be pretty.
At least get a game.
Very interesting story. But yeah, that's just something for Essendon fans to keep an eye on going into the mid-season draft this week.
Yeah.
But yes, jumping
Yeah, no,
over
that would be interesting.
to the MROs, Will Setterfield was got 2 fines, so I just put them into one. He was fined
Mm.
$2,000 for engaging in a melee with Ryan Mansell, which it goes to Ryan Mansell's fine, which I'll touch on in a second, and for contact with an umpire.
Mm. Although I'm glad you phrased that differently from the notes, because in the notes it says contact with an umpire and
And
engaged
engaging.
in
Oh, you
melee.
think he might have just punched on with the ump?
Yeah, yeah. It's like, oi, stop it. You can't be bumping into us all the time and then just exchange haymakers.
He could
Don't
have.
do that, by the way.
No, do not. Do
Not
not
AFL
disrespect
Coast
an
Coast
umpire
endorsed.
as much as they might make the wrong
Yeah,
call. And then
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Ryan Mansell was fined $1,875 because it's his second offense, I believe, for engaging in a melee. But yeah, so definitely
Yes.
a lot to kind of keep an eye on going into one going into the mid-season draft, because there's a couple of teams will definitely be taking a gander at that. And just for what Essendon, let alone Richmond, could do just before their buys in the next week or two.
Yeah, because as I said, like, all things considered, Essendon have done really well this season. I still maintain that. Like, I know they did overachieve last year. And, as I said, like, some people were like, oh, they could make the eight still, they can make the eight still. Like, I think most people were aware that that wasn't really going to happen. But to get to where they are, uh, technically, same wins as the Western Bulldogs. I say technically they are the same wins as the Western Bulldogs.
But they
Just
just
low
played one
percentage.
less game.
I mean, technically the same wins on the eight.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So who knows if they have that? If we can see in the future, they might be ahead in the eight because they'll beat the Gold Coast if that happened.
I don't know
That's
if
like
that's
a
gonna
weird,
happen considering how the Suns are going right now.
No, no, no. But I'm saying it's like Schrodinger's in the eight sort of thing.
Oh yeah,
Depending on how the future is. But you know what I mean. It's very impressive that they're there. I know they've had a soft schedule, but from what they've had to deal with, yeah, I think they've been out pretty well.
yeah, absolutely. All right, jumping over to our Saturday matches, starting off over at Marvel Stadium between Carlton and the Giants.
Yeah, and tell me if you've heard this story before, but it was another case of a mediocre second half for Carlton, as GWS put up a very brave performance away in a game, which was much more offensively played than most people, including myself, who put it as a Psyrick lock weird prediction that this would be a terribly dour and uninteresting game.
Hey, you remembered.
Not to be the case. Yeah, yeah, no, I remember. Um, but yeah, so it was very high scoring. The final score was 12-10, 82 Carlton to 17-8, 110.
Yes.
Giants by 28 at Marvel Stadium. And yeah, once again, Carlton could just not make use of their better territory against the Giants, as their forward half game is way too one dimensional and not consistent enough against the upper teams in the competition. I've sort of already talked about this when we're talking about Matt Kennedy, but as I said, up against the Giants, you just can't be putting it in predictable places when you've got the likes of Sam Taylor, um, Dylan, no, not Dylan Buckley. Is it
Jack Buckley.
one of the Buckleys? Jack Buckley, and even to a lesser extent, Harry Himmelberg.
Yes.
He's been pretty solid this season, especially when they've got a few generators of halfback. Lockie Whitfield, Lockie Ash. He's had a fantastic season. They, not always consistently, but do like to work it from the halfback line. So if you're going to be inefficient, you're just going to play into the Giants' hands. And I think, that's why I was fairly confident in the Giants coming into this game, and it sort of proved correct. Because, yeah, Carlton had enough opportunities, but couldn't make the most of it. Mid to forward connection, I've actually mentioned has been something missing this year for the Giants. And in the absence of Daniels, Kelly, Canelio, Stringer, and Callahan, most people thought this would be another lost game for GWS. But instead, we saw players like Callum Brown, Darcy Jones, whoever Thomas's first name is, and Xavier O'Halloran step up. And they were all led by the milestone man, Toby Green, who was everywhere in the forward half. And this just led to the shredding of Carlton's defence. as always, Carlton very impressive from stoppages, but like you mentioned, couldn't pierce that Giants defence. And they just had to work up a lot for their set shots. This led to Carlton transitioning the ball into their forward half very well, but being outscored 57-17 from the back half.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean there is they got enough times they transitioned from D50 into their forward half, but they weren't getting much out of it.
Yeah.
Players like Sard and Doherty were having pretty good games on the halfback line for Carlton. Yeah, in the air and on the ground, Carlton on an individual level defended solidly. They're still one of the better defensive teams in the competition. But it's just that lack of threat going the other way led to enough moments where the opposition, can score enough from catching their defense on the hop, which I think was sort of what GWS did in a very disciplined fashion. I can't remember. I think GWS must have scored a lot of their score off turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as I said, it wasn't... Yeah, that's right. 13-5, 83 off turnover. So, while, obviously what the 27 shots from GWS isn't a good sign for Carlton's defense, I don't think it was that terrible. They were a bit scattered, mind you. I wouldn't call this a good game by the Carlton backline, but I think this was just a fact of, both teams were getting a bit exposed defensively. It's just that one was more their last line of defense because they got Carlton to enter the way that they wanted to.
Yep.
They were much more solid, much more set up. Whereas Carlton, they weren't really getting GWS. They weren't stopping the dangerous bits of movement from GWS. And when it did get in there, it was quite lethal, really.
Yeah, that's right. I think I completely agree with that. Also, for note, the Thomas player that you couldn't remember the first name of was Harvey Thomas.
Thomas, yeah.
Second note, Angus Clark did win Rising Star, going on to the previous game.
Last game,
but on this, it's the fact that despite missing some very key players, they're still missing Daniels, which is crazy. And the fact that they're still doing so well in terms of, well, not just around on the ground forward pressure, but even just in their transition sort of period. Because Brent Daniels has been a really key part of that previously, and the fact that they're able to they have adjusted as the season's gone on without him, and even with no Kelly either, no Cogs. Stringer has been very inconsistent and out with injury, of course. So Jesse Hogan's had to step up again, which is unsurprising. Riccardi has had a pretty interesting comeback, even though I still don't really rate him. He's had a really solid bit of the season so far. And obviously, as you mentioned before, Callum Brown has stepped up a fair bit as well. There's these players that are able to step up into roles that aren't necessarily theirs, but have had to come in and fill and have done really well.
Yeah, honestly, I think Callum Brown's done more in the year than Aaron Cadman has, and I know he's, pulling up, but I really like the fact that Callum Brown, when maybe Cadman's doing a bit less deep, he comes up, pushes up, tries to get involved, and I think that's also what we're seeing from Riccardi, where now that he's taking more of a second ruck role, he's getting a bit more involved. He doesn't disappear as much in games.
Yeah.
And obviously he took his opportunities. He wasn't quite as featured in the first half, but the second half he was actually fairly good. So, they really benefited from having a wide range. But obviously, led by the milestone man, he was such a threat. Not just in front of goals, but distributing the ball.
Absolutely. So, as you said, Toby Green himself, 250 games, was absolutely elite. He kicked 3-3 from 28 disposals, 11 contested possessions, 9 marks with 4 of them inside 50, 6 inside 50, 6 clearances, 13 score involvements, 4 tackles, 18 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets, 565 metres gained. Lee Collier, not related to Alir, has been steadily improving in defence, finishing with 8 touches, 7 of them effective, equating to 87.5% efficiency, 3 intercepts, 5 marks with 2 of them being intercept marks, 2 inside 50s, 9 1%ers and 8 spoils. Youngster Darcy Jones put on solid pressure, collecting 16 disposals, 13 of them effective, equating to 81.3% efficiency. 7 contested possessions, 3 intercepts, 3 marks, 2 clearances, a behind, 8 score involvements, 7 tackles, 28 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, and 6 ground ball gets. Adam Chera for Carlton put out some solid effort this week, kicking 1-1 from 23 touches, 10 contested possessions, 5 marks, 4 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 8 score involvements, 6 tackles, 19 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets, 391 meters gained. I think his addition into that midfield rotation has been very solid. Whereas, because he's always been a little bit kind of, I don't want to say underrated, but a little bit more underperformed on that halfback. But I think his inclusion going through that midfielder has upped him a little bit.
Chera?
Yeah. I know he's normally meant to be in that midfield, but he's kind of been pushed out a little bit.
Yeah, he sort of drifts in,
as involved.
Goes inside, outside sort of thing. I know what you mean. He's sort of stuck in between being like a defensive-oriented midfielder that plays on the outside versus occasionally they'll just ask you to be a bull, and it's a very weird. And Chera's like a really solid player that I think's lacked a defined role in much of his Carlton career.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the injuries have not, especially for this season, have not helped at all.
Yeah.
Especially with also the loss of Kennedy too. But just to lastly touch on a player, Captain Patrick Cripps, of course, had a solid captain's game otherwise, kicking 1-1 from 25 disposals, 20 contested possessions, 3 marks, 3 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 4 score involvements, 7 tackles, but 2 of them inside 50, 70 pressure acts, and 9 ground ball gets. And then also a shout out to debutant Harry O'Farrell. He finished with 9 touches, 6 intercepts, 7 pressure acts, and 4 1%ers for notable stats.
I got a feeling that's who was born on the year that Ward made his debut.
Potentially.
I think that's what I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's really...
but we'll claim it.
I don't think there's really too much more to touch on. It's kind of just one of those games.
Yeah. Yeah, I will make one point. Lekalia is very interesting because first game this season, I don't think he's been injured. I think it's just been outside the side because GWS has been defensively solid. But out of contract this year, he might go to a new home, I reckon. I think he's just a bit too good to be playing in the VFL. He didn't have that many possessions, but I think he put it down. I don't know if you watched this game, but he was definitely very involved.
I did catch the highlights because I did completely miss this game. So I did watch the highlights for this. And yeah, what I noticed from him is that he was very good in contest. He was very good one-on-one. And it's just kind of, it is someone that, is definitely going to find it really hard to really fit into that backline completely when you have, your Taylors and your Buckleys and your Himmelbergs that are really the key pillars of that backline.
Yeah, because as I said, it's just interesting because again, he can drift off and just go influence contests. He can stay on a player. He doesn't need to get possession because obviously they already have enough in the back. It's actually probably underrated, how decent Sam Taylor's possessions are. Harry Himmelberg, probably a bit more of the distributor, but you know what I mean? So it should be interesting. I think he could find a place in a niche club that might be looking for that sort of player, but I think GWS would want him all the same. He's a fantastic depth. He just might be one of those players that are a bit too good to have his depth.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of players that could definitely utilize him in defense. St Kilda definitely being one of them right now.
Yeah, they could use a toll that can allow Wilkie to play intercept, so, or even just he intercepts himself. So,
yeah, let's jump over to our next game, which was held not far away over at the MCG. It was Hawthorn hosting the reigning premiers, the Brisbane Lions.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to be too harsh on it because I think some of the disappointment came from the fact that we both tipped Hawthorn.
Yes, well,
but I just think it was a bit.
I will be honest. I did originally tip Brisbane. I flipped it purely because of Lloyd Meek and no Oscar McInerney. I will be honest. But the issue that I found when going back on this game was that Hawthorn are really, really struggling without Will Day in that midfield.
Yeah, well, I make a few points in the notes. But yeah, as I said, it was pretty much a letdown for the Hawks. And as you mentioned, they're normally good on the outside midfield and good enough on the inside midfield. But I got absolutely smashed at the contest, and their movement was rendered ineffective as the Lions were pretty defensively stout. Not so much against the key tolls, but especially against the ground level players. As Hawthorn amazingly only scored 0-3 from general play. Talking about general play woes, as Watson and Ginnivan were barely a factor. Ginnivan did score a goal one, but honestly, he wasn't that threatening the entire night. Weddle was actually the only Hawk with multiple forward 50 ground ball gets.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually a fair few teams this week which had a toll player win forward ball gets. Forward 50 ground ball gets.
Yes.
This was obviously one of the ones more worth mentioning. Watto and Ginnivan got none. In Ginnivan's case, he at least got a tackle inside 50. Watson couldn't say the same. So yeah, that was pretty much the absence of a ground level game for Hawthorn. Obviously, it was a bit more than that, but that was like the key indicator that something was up. And yeah, it was just a lack of pressure on the ground. Left their defense a bit exposed too, because again, it wasn't just in the forward 50, it was in the midfield. And yeah, as I said, they were a bit more, in terms of their defense, they were a bit more off than outright bad. But I think the second quarter absolutely killed them. The Lions just went off the chain, and it put a lot of separation into the games in terms of margin. They just, after that, again, the Lions just let the game come to them. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but they really didn't put the foot on the throat. They were just getting enough from Hawthorn's lack of attack after they got the lead, and they just turned it into a comfortable win, which arguably tempered, but very solid still. I think, yeah, that's just what we got used to seeing the Lions play, because I feel like before the premiership, they were just out to prove that they could take teams to the sword, especially after that slow start. But I don't know. Do you think it's pacing themselves, or do you think that there's just something a bit off about it? Because it's not a bad thing. They're still winning games.
I think it's a bit of both. Like especially as they try to include Kitty Coleman back into this lineup. Obviously, he was taken out for this week being managed, as he had only managed minutes in the AFL the week prior. So I think it's just more a balance of like including some of these players that have missed a fair amount of games, and also just trying to. Well, I mean, they're still kind of. I thought that maybe that they had fixed the hole that Danaher left, but it seems like they're still kind of trying to work out a couple of things in regards to that. So that could also be a factor up forward, but it's not necessarily like. I feel like I think they're definitely like pacing themselves at the same time as trying to include a bit more like a couple of other players into this sort of rotating factor.
Yeah, because also like even Hawthorn's defense, it was really that 3 goals by Charlie Cameron almost in quick succession. I think it was all in the space of like 20 minutes. And not saying like Charlie Cameron was bad before that, but
he was definitely not performing the way that he should be.
And then 3 goals. Doesn't kick a goal for the rest of the match, but it gets involved more in distribution. But apart from that, it was just moments here and there. Cal Archie got 4 goals, but a lot of them were fairly late. I think 2 of them might have been in the last quarter. I mean, it's still pretty impressive getting 2 goals, but you know what I mean? It was just, it's really hard because I think it was a good game. I was very impressed by the Lions, less so against Hawthorn. Talk a bit more in a second, but yeah, as I said, it's just, a bit, I wouldn't say pedestrian, but, as I said, you're right, their forward line, whether it's just they're protecting their forward line a bit more by making, they're not trying as hard, to just brute force it in.
Yeah.
They're being a bit more measured, taking a bit more turnover time. So maybe there's a bit of protection there. But it makes it seem like they're less threatening, but maybe that's just like a false sense of, comfort. Maybe they are just going to be very solid for the rest of the year. And when push comes to shove, they'll create a bit more, but, it's just interesting.
I mean, they don't necessarily have to blow teams out of the water. Like, right now, all that really matters for them
teams after premiership do that
is the 4 points.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, Hawthorn were the absolute killers because you think, oh, they're not going to win the premiership this year. They look a bit more off, and then come September they'll be absolutely brutal again. So, if it is pacing, we'll call Fagan a genius, but it could also just be he's making slow adjustments as well. They again structurally they have made a few things, and they're still running a few younger kids. So, wait and see there.
I
But
definitely
we'll talk
think,
about Hawthorn.
just before we
Oh,
do, I
sorry, you go.
definitely think like the fact that there are like, as much as Premiership Ruckman Dusty Fort is always going to
Mm,
be like second fiddle to the big O. He's not always the right option in some ruck matchups, and it's I don't know
yeah,
if they have anyone else they're able to trial in that role, or if that's just someone just trying to get Dusty Fort more involved around the ground as well as in the ruck contests, especially against someone like Lloyd Meek, for an example, who won out pretty much
yeah,
overall in this match.
yeah. But I mean, the thing is, though, I mean, I would say Darcy Fort won, really. Like, Darcy Fort, yeah, sure, like, he got the most hit outs. And I'll talk about this a bit because this leads to my next point. 24 clearances for Hawthorn, 1 goal, 3 from stoppage,
Mm.
0 score from centre bounce. Like, you have such a massive advantage, but it doesn't really matter because it's not there. In comparison, Brisbane 5-5 from stoppage, still pretty healthy there, and 0-3 from centre bounce, which is neither here nor there, but you know what I mean. So as I said, and this continues on because it is actually becoming one of Hawthorn's most glaring weaknesses in the league.
Mm-hmm.
They are the second worst stoppage differential in the league, and in the last 3 or 4 games, have got under 30 clearances, which is actually worse than West Coast is going in the last 5 games. To put that into comparison, obviously West Coast last overall. I don't think you'll get any points for figuring that one out. Uh, Granted, this was the only game that actually haven't suffered from it. They've actually suffered from it. Their last, as I said, 3 of the 4 games that I mentioned before, they were actually still scoring around somewhere between 20 or 30 points from stoppage, which is still okay. But this is just the game where it obviously sort of just killed them. And as for the Lions, they don't like losing the clearance battle. All their losses and draws have come from a loss in differential. Is just like an interesting comparison because whilst both midfields are very balanced and solid, both inside and out, um, obviously I'm going to say Hawthorn are less solid, but they do have the thing about Hawthorn's inside midfield is they get involved in score.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of the trade off. They don't win the ball as much. They're a bit like Geelong, but they'll always be involved in score involvements. But as we're saying, like this ball winning dominance of the Lions is what Hawthorn lacks the most. And I think that we might be seeing like this is the advantage of where Hawthorn being tipped tiny too much towards aerial movement over ground ball. Like there's just going to be certain matchups in the league that are going to expose them a bit. And it's going to be hard in finals to find a way to not get blown away by teams like Brisbane, teams like the Western Bulldogs, maybe even Gold Coast again on a good day. I know Gold Coast are a bit better in the air than on the ground, but sort of in terms of bowl winning ability, they probably have the edge over that. So,
Yeah.
I do think Hawks are good. I do think they're going to make an impact in final, but you know, this might be one of the like flag games that Mitchell has to really work on a few things because they just got exposed.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, and as I said, like right at the start, like I think they are genuinely missing Will Day because he added so much when he was in, and they're just kind of, and even though they have been able to work around it previously, this feels like the year where they built a lot more around Will Day as their key structure, and it's
Mm,
just really struggling to cover that right now because they're getting exposed so often in one
yeah,
specific area in that midfield.
yeah, and I mean, as much as you say, it's like it's a pretty all round drop off. Like I think Connor Nash has been consistent, but he's like a fairly big role player. But when you look at Jai Newcomb's stat compared to the earlier in the year, when you look at the Warpedo compared to that, you know,
Yeah.
Josh Ward, I would say, is also like the consistent, but it's one of the concerning things where the role players have been a bit more level than their actual meant to be bowl winners. So yeah, I don't know. They've just got a bit of tinkering to do, but I mean, yeah, Mitchell's a good coach. I wouldn't write him off because of this performance.
Oh no,
but
absolutely
this
not.
is definitely where other teams are going to be looking into how to stop Hawthorn.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Speaking of the team that did stop Hawthorn, though, Brisbane, of course. I'm going to jump over to our individuals, starting with Dane Zorko. Fun fact: he's 36 and is still putting up numbers like this. So he finished with 33 disposals, 25 effective possessions, equating to 75.8% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 9 marks, 5 inside 50, 6 score involvements, 14 pressure strikes, 5 ground ball gets, and 996 meters gained. His kicks, his handballs, like they go the distance.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best meters gain player in this half decade.
Mm-hmm.
Half decade? No, decade.
This current decade, past 5 years.
Yeah.
Although
Well, I meant like since his career in this time frame.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was probably Heath Shaw before that. I think Zorko's taken the reins of like meters gain king.
In terms of like veteran talents, I'd say so.
Yeah, I guess.
Because obviously we've got a ton of younger players who are hitting these huge numbers now. But I think in terms of like the veteran talent in the league,
no, in terms of like a whole career sort of thing, yeah. I said I feel like it went Heath Shaw to Zorko.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. Next player on the list is one of your favorite players at Brisbane, Ryan Froggy Lester. He was so solid in defense this week, collecting 13 touches, 9 of them effective, equating to 69.2% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 7 intercepts, 6 marks, 6 tackles, 15 pressure acts, 7 1%ers, 6 ground ball gets, and 7 spoils. Cal Archie kicked truly up forward, which is very good because it was him and his family who designed their Indigenous Guernsey for Sir Doug Nicholls Rounds. He slotted 4-2 from 20 disposals, 15 effective, equating to 75% efficiency, 7 contested possessions, 10 marks, with 3 of them inside 50, 8 score involvements, 14 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, 4 ground ball gets, with 3 of those also inside 50, and 3 spoils. For Hawthorn, Carl Amon was immense with ball movement and transition, finishing with 29 touches, 23 effective, equating to 79.3% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 7 marks, 5 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, 16 pressure acts, and 768 meters gained. And then Connor McDonald kicked pretty well whenever he moved up forward, kicking 3-1 from 20 disposals, 5 contested possessions, 10 marks, 3 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, 5 pressure acts, 4 ground ball gets. Jumping over to the injuries, it wasn't an actual injury, but it was a late change. Jarman Impey was changed out for personal reasons. If all is good with him, he will be back next week, provided they don't have the bye. I can't remember. We'll talk about it in a moment anyway.
Yeah.
And then over on the MRO front, Harris Andrews was fined $3,750 for a low impact strike on Connor McDonald. And John Newcomb was fined $6,250. I feel like I might have read that wrong, but maybe I didn't. I'll double check on that.
Up. Maybe it's 2 fines.
Might have been 2 fines for rough conduct against Jared Berry. Let me double check that. But otherwise, yeah, this is such an interesting game when you look at these two teams from overall perspectives.
Yeah, and it's like, it's weird because technically the Lions were a bit in shaky form going into it, and Hawthorn have dropped a couple of games, so they haven't looked that out of it. But now Hawthorn sort of have to. It's not like it's a huge hole for them, but I think they've lost 3 out of the last 4, haven't they? Or something.
Something pretty close to that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look at the ladder, but
also I just checked Newcomb's fine. He was straight up fined $10,000. Reduced to 6.25 with an early plea because it's his 5th offense.
Yeah.
So yeah, the more he gets involved in some rough moments, the higher that fine is going to be.
Yeah. As for Hawthorn, they do play next week. This is what I was saying. They've got to prevent a loss of 3 against Collingwood at the G next week. So if they lose that,
that's a tough ask.
So again, that's what I meant. Hawthorn will have to be strong to get themselves out of a hole. But yeah, we'll talk about that a bit next because we have got to talk about the team that they're facing.
That we do. We're
now.
jumping back over to Marvel Stadium because Marvel Stadium held a doubleheader on Saturday between North
First time in
Melbourne.
ages, I think.
No, there was one a couple of weeks ago, I think. I can't remember. It was either Marvel or the MCG that were doing a doubleheader, but there was definitely one recently.
No, I think for Marvel specifically.
Yeah, it might have been a bit
I think
longer.
it's the first time. I think it might have been the first time it's ever had a doubleheader, but I might be wrong on that.
No, I think you're definitely wrong on that, but it's definitely been a couple of weeks since the more recent doubleheader. But anyway, jumping over there for North Melbourne and Collingwood.
Yeah, I don't know too much about this game because again, I didn't really watch it, even the highlights. I did hear a bit about it, so a very weird game apparently. North was keeping up with a very inefficient Collingwood, who were moving the ball a lot quicker than North, but denied enough by their defense that were forced into a few more inaccurate shots and a lot of rush behinds. Not surprisingly, North's clearance game again sort of kept them into the contest, like they sort of have when they've been up and about this week. And I did look at the stats, and their midfield disposal wasn't actually that bad. I know I've not told off, but criticised a few of their midfield groups for being a bit of ball banners, but I don't think that was actually a problem. They did take a lot of uncontested mark, but they were just sort of shut down more actually in their forward 50 by the defensive strength of the pie, who just simply didn't care. Who simply don't care, I should say, that more is missing from the side. From the second week in a row, Howe and Brampton were acting like defensive leaders without their captain, laid spoil after spoil, and restricted the Roos to just 9 set shots for the night. Damn well broke in the last quarter, and the margin went from trailing by 3 points to losing by 45, with Collingwood kicking a massive 8-1 in the last quarter, putting the Roos away. The final margin was 9-9-63, the Roos, 15-18, 108, Magpies winning by 45.
The interesting thing about this game is that when you look at how this game kind of played out, it is so similar to how they matched up last year. The only difference is that North had a much bigger lead up until the end of that third quarter last year, and then immediately lost it and lost the game by 1 point. Whereas these teams evenly contended with each other up until the third quarter, and then North just plummeted.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of weird because I'm glad you made that comparison because I think you're sort of right. Like, again, we're talking about how even, and I know the spacing of this game wasn't that even, but you know what I mean? Like, in terms of when they got their dominance, it was a bit different in certain areas. But, honestly, I think it also shows, like, how good Magpies' defense has gone because, again, North got a fair few entries. They just got nothing really from them. But on the flip side, I actually think there was signs that North's defense were on a decent amount of track. Collingwood are actually no more efficient than they normally were inside 50 and had less marking around the ground. So they weren't really letting them control the play as much as Collingwood like to. The biggest statistical difference was the movement and by hand, sorry, I should say, which, sort of meant that Collingwood didn't overly care about the lack of marking avenues because they could work out the handball, work the ball out well to handball and not just do that because they've been doing that all year. But this time they've got it into a lot of their best distributors who sort of mix it up by either extending the train by doing an occasional long kick or just extending the handball chain. So like this is one thing I sometimes criticize teams for, and I will mention this about Port because they did it in their game, or Yartapuulti, I should say, for this round. But they were, and a few other teams are like this, they either choose the kick early or choose the long handball chain. It's like that they can't actually mix up. It's like it's almost a set play rather than adjusting for the situation. Whereas Collingwood more often than not know when to get the kickoff. And if you compare it to, and I only really did this, I can't tell it by feel, but I just noticed it when I was looking at the handball received targets. The people that were getting the handball received had very low handballs themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And these were players like Caleb Daniel, having in the halfback, I should also mention, Hardiman and Tom Powell. And I think that's the reason why you saw a high number of clangers and turnovers, resulting into points against from North Melbourne, because a lot of these were happening in the back half.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though Collingwood actually had a fair number of turnovers themselves, they weren't getting burnt off it. As I
Yeah.
said, it was more just, it was a lot more deliberate and by design. And, as I said, it just resulted in far better movement. And even though, as I said, from what I gathered, North actually defended a lot of that movement okay, again, they just sort of broke down in that last quarter. When, as I said, you're not getting that much yourself. You're getting it coming the other way often enough. It tends to just happen where you tend to get beat. Matchups become a bit easier, tend to get a bit more deep threats, and Collingwood took advantage of that.
Absolutely, and they pretty much just lifted. Like I did see that, as much as I don't really want to mention him super much, but Nick Dacos, who took over the captaincy for this game with Moore being out once again, he had 17 disposals in that last quarter.
Yeah.
Like that's how impactful he became when pretty much the game was still on the line, right? Like he
Yeah.
pretty much stopped everything coming into North's forward 50 and just forced them
Yeah.
immediately back down into their forward half.
And I should say, it's not like he was having a quiet game, because you haven't got him in the individuals, because he
I
won't
don't.
talk about other people. But
Mm-hmm.
he had 38 disposals for the night. So he was on 29 at three-quarter time. It's not like he was quiet up until then.
Oh no, so
Uh,
yeah, he had 17
Probably not.
disposals in the second half. I should be more specific, but
Oh, second half. Okay. So,
that's it.
are you sure? I think it was one quarter. I thought it was, he went off
I,
the chain. Maybe.
I can't remember.
Anyway, he had a very big last quarter. I know that. But yeah, as I mentioned, like, maybe his impact wasn't as big in some areas. Again, he only had a moderately good player rating. But it was clear to see, like, as I said, definitely, definitely part of that facilitator where I was talking about, where he had a healthy amount of handballs, but also a healthy amount of kick. I think it's just good for a team like Collingwood to have that mix up, because again, they're not the most lethally efficient team going around, but they've gotten a lot better at getting flowing movement, especially off turnovers. It's very hard to defend the transition, and I think, yeah, as I said, Collingwood got some insane transition numbers. From defensive half to forward 50, they got it in there 41.7% of the times. So, yeah, which is pretty much almost double what North had, which were 28.4, which is still a decent number. So yeah, it didn't end up too much score. It was only 5-7 defensive half score from Collingwood, but still a lot of scoring shots to just free fall for North Melbourne.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was just trying to find if I could find that accurate information on Dacos. But yeah, no, it shows Collingwood know when to pull the trigger when the game's on the line. Like they know how to make that they know how to make that switch. Granted, it was against a bottom four team, but
Yeah,
on the contrary of that is that North are improving. The fact that despite the fact
yeah,
that they didn't get the inside 50 entries that they wanted, they were still able to contend with Collingwood's midfield. They were able to hold them back in their own defense. Like they're on the right track to being able to contend with these top 8 teams, and obviously also middle of the pack teams, even if they can't fully finish out games.
yeah. But I will say the hard thing, especially for North, who aren't that great at it anyway, is that Collingwood are a very hard team to tackle, and they only average 52 tackles against per game.
Hmm.
North did not get their hands on him, and that's sort of what I was talking about, the handball with the difference, where Collingwood slick when they're sort of, mixing it up, it becomes very hard. You got to decide to corral a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And the tackle count ended up being a massive differential. It was 90 to 48. So that's what I think some of the turnovers and variants were coming from, where, as I said, not only was the pressure there, because I think North were apparently putting on enough pressure. Like, they weren't like that lacking in pressure acts or anything. But as I mentioned, when you're moving the hand so well, it is deceptively hard to tackle. Whereas because North were so predictable, and again, going off vibes here, I didn't actually watch it. They ended up getting tackled a bit more, which again forces a few more turnovers, makes you a bit more forward half base, and yeah, as I said, players like Bo McCreary is very good at this. That's why they love him in that forward line. Jamie Elliott normally gets a few tackles as well, and yeah, as I said, you got some players to also talk about in terms of Collingwood individually that were very good at that pressure. One of them being Jamie Elliott himself.
Absolutely, that is very right. What a great segue into that, because he was very consistent up forward and was great with pressure. He kicked 5 goals from 11 disposals, 8 of them effective, equating to 72.7% efficiency, 5 marks with 3 of them inside 50, 8 score involvements, 5 tackles with 4 of them inside 50, and 11 pressure acts. Ned Long once again proved his importance to this midfield group, finishing with 29 touches, 23 effective, equating to 79.3% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 4 inside 50, 6 clearances, 2 goal assists, 15 score involvements, 14 tackles with 4 of them inside 50, 30 pressure acts, and 7 ground ball gets. And then Isaac Quaynor, who doesn't get a huge amount of mention on the pod, but he was immense off of intercept this week. He collected 23 disposals, 19 of them effective, equating to 82.6% efficiency. 8 contested possessions, 10 intercepts, 8 marks, with 4 of them intercept marks, 4 score involvements, 5 tackles, 8 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, and 3 spoils. Shout out to Collingwood debutant Will Hayes as well for 7 touches, 3 marks, 6 tackles, and 20 pressure acts, which is huge for a debutant for one. And the fact that he didn't start as a sub either is... Oh, actually, no, he did. Because he came on for Maynard, who went off. He only played like 11 minutes.
Yeah,
so
he was on pretty early.
It was like it's a very impressive game for someone so young to put on that much pressure, so like just instinctually, essentially. Jumping over to North Melbourne, and of course I'm going to mention him, Tristan Sherry was absolutely dominant against Darcy Cameron this week. He finished with 31 hitouts with 8 to advantage and a goal from 17 touches, 18 contested possessions, 3 intercepts, 7 clearances, 5 score involvements, 11 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 4 spoils. And then recruit Jacob Constanti looked very solid with pressure, kicking a goal from 8 touches, 3 marks with 2 of them inside 50, 6 tackles, and 18 pressure acts.
Yeah, and I think...
go on.
Oh, sorry, no, you go.
Sure?
Okay, I was going to say, it's... the interesting thing too is, again, talking about that midfield tackling, and as I mentioned, the midfield unit didn't really get much tackle, but it does seem fitting that it sort of lined up with what's his name, probably his worst game, George Wardlaw. I only had to look at his stat line, but it looked like he had an absolute stinker. No, I mean, go at him. He's only a second year player, isn't he?
He's a third year player, I think.
Third year player. But you know what I mean? It's just like, again, I think that North Melbourne, again, and as I said, like, it's hard to do it against Collingwood, but I think it just goes to show that, I think they do rely on a lot of pressure coming from Wardlaw, and it sort of showed in the tackle discrepancy in this game.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Jumping over onto the injury front, as I mentioned, Braden Maynard did I did actually kind of read the breakdown of this, but it was a foot injury, to put it simply. He will be out for a fair amount of time. He'll probably come back after the bye, I would assume. Maybe a little bit longer than that, but there you have it. Scott Pendlebury was a late change with an illness. I assume it's probably just a cold, something like that, something basic. That's not too bad. And then Bobby Hill was also a late change as well for a personal reason, so hopefully all is good over there. Jumping over to the MRO, Paul Curtis, who came back from his suspension, was fined $3,750 for rough conduct against Dan Houston. Harry Perryman was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. Jai Simpkin was fined $1,000 for striking Ned Long. And Nick Larkey was fined $3,750 for striking Big Billy Frampton.
Yeah, I will say, like, it's not often that cold's the reason why, or flu is the reason why players miss from illness. I'm pretty sure the most common one is gastroenteritis.
Yeah, that
Because
does sound about right.
just with the exercise, you tend to be protected a bit more, especially against flus. Well, more so against the common cold, but minorly against flus as well.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's
but
normally like a
also,
gastro bug sort of thing.
yeah, because as I said, the most common way you get that is obviously as well from food, and yeah, players tend to eat a bit more. And I don't think stomach bugs actually are affected as much by fitness, immune system. I think that's just one of the things where you either get it or you don't.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how fit you are.
Yeah,
So
that's fair.
yeah, that's just a bit of human bio for you.
That's just how the body is, you know.
Yeah, well, it might just be me stalling because we're about to get to the Dower affair we were talking about before.
Indeed, we are. We're going to jump over out to the west, over to Optus Stadium, where you were boots on ground for Walyalup versus Yartapuulti.
Yes, rare rainy night in Perth. We've already mentioned, and for Yartapuulti, the damn walls broke yet again after halftime. As despite it being a relatively close contest for the first half, they were just continuously unravelled, both defending stoppages and turning the ball over in their back half, exposing their defence. As opponents now score an average of 52 points against them from forward half chains, most in the league. Walyalup just get their defence pumped, and it's normally coming off movements on the back half. Sorry, I meant Yartapuulti. Walyalup, on the other hand, were very clunky with their ball movement, but were pretty good once they got it inside 50, and that was because of the ground level talent of their players, especially the youngsters, the dual rookie threat of Dudders and Reed, as scoring 9-4 in wet conditions at ground level. From general play was no easy feat, and at times they made it look easy. The game was pretty even apart from conversion, in terms of just pure stats wise, but it was really efficiency that was the main separator that helped Walyalup dominate this game. Yartapuulti, as I mentioned before, couldn't decide between possession chains just being one long dump kick or a 10 possession long handball chain that resulted in a turnover. Whilst Walyalup were turning the ball over, struggling with their movement a bit, at least they were doing it in areas that didn't hurt them on the rebound or turnovers going the other way. But yeah, Port's midfield is both killing their forward line and defending with their inefficiency. And without Jason Horne-Francis, who isn't even a high effective disposal player anyway, but without his polish, it was really hard to see where the threats were coming from. Georgiadis was providing a bit in defense, but in the forward line, but it's a bit much for him to just be the only person down there. So it allowed Freo's defense to stand tall, swallowed the worst of the entries, as Port did solidly against the Freo Tolls, but just didn't have the matchups on ground level. But I will concede that is more injury based, not having quite the best matchups they would want. And it let the rookies run all over them.
Yeah, no, that's fairly accurate. Like Port are in that position where a couple of other teams are, where it's just the injury toll is starting to kind of hit. They're just really trying to push out to the bye round for them, and then just so they can reassess and see what the options are going into the second half of the season.
Yeah, and I think the most concerning thing is because they have had these sort of games in the last few years, but it feels like more consistently Port are breaking. And I know it's partially because they're, blooding in the youngsters and all that, but I do think there's other personnel issues, and I've sort of made this like a minor point for this segment because it's not that much to talk about. As I mentioned, Walyalup were fairly good, but it's sort of hard because it was just like a very good conversion, but everything else, it was a good game, but because it was wet weather, it didn't look that pretty.
Yeah.
But all things considering, it was actually pretty decent. But in terms on the flip side, I got to talk about the captain Connor Rosie because a lot of talk was, how good it was him moving to the halfback line and, like rejuvenated him. And there is parts that I do agree. Like it did lift his game for a couple of games, but I'd actually argue that it's coming back to haunt Port a bit more because I've got his stats for the year. And keep in mind, some of this was from when he was still in the midfield, but he is first for turnovers per game and 11th for clangers per game. And only 30% of his total possessions are contested. So that's both in his time in the back half and in the midfield. He's probably the poster child for ball burners in the, probably not just the competition. Sorry, not just for Port, but in the competition. And as I said, 22% of his possessions are turnovers. And as I said, while it's probably improved a tiny bit since his move in the back half, he is still having a few possessions per game that results in direct goals against. And it's one of those things where I don't think we can afford to play him there. Like maybe with Farrell there, it's not too bad. Farrell obviously had a pretty bad game before he went off in injury. And that's when we we're getting a bit more exposed. But honestly, just without that go-to distributor, I just don't think we can be playing Rosie there. I think with him being the main focus, it's actually costing us a bit more than we're gaining. And I just think it's a bit of a shame because, again, A, it just shows how much we miss Houston. And B, it sort of leaves us in the bind because, I wouldn't drop him. You know what I mean? Like, well, I mean, look, if he was a younger kid, I'd probably drop him for a game. Like, find a bit of form in the waffle, try and get your waffle, Sample.
Yeah.
Try and get your kicks. It's just not that point of his career, but you know what I mean? It just leaves us in a very awkward space where we can't find a position for him. He's still providing enough to be in the team, but man, he's just not being able to provide what Port need right now. And it's very much a shame because he is our captain. And I know he's trying hard enough. I know he's not actively trying to let the team down or, even his efforts. I've never questioned his intensity or the way he's approached the game. It's just, as I said, it's just a very unfortunate situation where we really need a strong leader at the moment. And it's just, I don't think Rose is able to provide it. And, as I said, it's not like a call for blood or anything. It's just a bit, I just think, as much talk as we have about Hinkley, there are a fair few players and senior or core players that just aren't providing at the moment. It's not just because we're playing kids. It's not just because Hinkley's a bit washed as a coach. I think it's all that combination of things that are leading to a disastrous year, which really is a bit surprising how bad it's been. Especially in the forward line. I'm really surprised our forward line has gotten worse from last year, and last year was pretty dismal.
Yeah, it's Porter in a really interesting position right now because it's a part of it is 100% your injuries. Like there's not a doubt on that front, but the fact that Rosie could be completely out of position even though he has looked decent on halfback. Obviously getting Butters back was definitely a huge plus when he came back from injury. Like he was definitely needed in that midfield. But the fact that there are so many other players around him that are just feel like they're kind of just doing nothing is really hard. Because you look at other teams that are in a similar situation on an injury front, but they're still performing. Essendon are a very good example of this. Like they still have such a strong midfield despite the fact that they have all of these injuries to their tolls.
Yeah. And I'd say Essendon's midfield are more balanced than Port are because, individually they're performing okay. Ollie Wines was probably the best inside midfielder for the game. He wasn't that threatening. Will and Drew put on a lot of pressure. But again, you're not looking to him. We just really need that uncontested outside player. We've just gone a bit too much all in on, really nitty gritty ball winners. We just need a few players that you can dish off the handball to and dispose very well. And we're not even getting that much from the outside because Jess Burgoyne has had good games this year, but it's not actually that not accurate with his kicking.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's actually only going around 50% by kick. Travis Bake's a bit iffy with his disposal in his old age, and you know what I mean? So it's just neither inside or outside. We just don't have targets for transition that can distribute the ball at a very solid level.
Yeah.
And, as I mentioned, and it gets to the point where we are getting good territory, but we're not getting damaging territory. And it just leads to a lot of flapping around in our forward half because, as much as our forward line isn't that great, like Joe Richards is still doing a bit, Georgiades is still enough to where if we had decent supply, it's at least winnable. But yeah, not just not the way we present the ball, really.
Yeah, it feels like out of character for Port, but it's also in character at the same time because we know how bad they can be at times. And
oh yeah, absolutely.
It's like a really weird coin flip of a team right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that. I think they're actually verging towards just bad, really. They've got the potential to win games, but yeah, structurally they just look fairly putrid. I'm going to be very surprised if they turn this around. I've had more faith in Port from worse positions in other years than I have this year. This just seems not unsalvageable, but
Getting
it's
to
going
that
to
point.
take. Yeah, well, as I said, it's just going to take changes in players that I just don't think are quite there yet.
Yeah.
So I think the gear reset will do them more good. I don't think they're like the future doesn't worry me as much as other people. I don't even mind that much that we don't have a first round draft pick because I don't really think we need youth all that much. But we do need to find a way to get more out of the risk we take because we take so many risks. But when it's going to a forward line that can't convert, or sorry, when the last kick is a blaze to a forward line, like we take so many risks off halfback, and then we take the most pedestrian kicks into our forward 50,
Yeah.
and it just makes the risk not worth it because you're gambling just to not get much out of attack. It's quite concerning, and I know I'm getting animated, so we'll probably move on. But
I can
as I said,
feel
it's
the
quite
energy.
frustrating. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I'll jump over to our individuals now, starting with Luke Jackson, who was immense against Dante Vicentini. Not to knock Vicentini at all, I thought he had a solid ruck game.
No, I thought it was okay, but hard.
But Luke Jackson had his numbers around the ground and also in the ruck itself, getting 38 hitouts, 18 to advantage, and kicking 1-1 from 21 disposals, 15 contested possessions, 6 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 9 score involvements, 19 pressure acts, and 10 ground ball gets. Youngster Murphy Reed, as you had mentioned earlier, kicked truly up forward, slotting 4 goals from 18 touches, 8 contested possessions, 3 marks, 6 score involvements, 4 tackles, 12 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets. And then I was kind of looking for like a third person to kind of really talk about, and I ended up landing on Caleb Sarong. He looked pretty unleashed in the midfield, didn't really have someone to run with or tag on him. So he finished with 29 disposals, 18 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 3 inside 50s, 12 clearances, 6 score involvements, 4 tackles, 25 pressure acts, 15 ground ball gets, 483 meters gained. Jumping over to Port Adelaide, and as you mentioned, Willem Drew put on some monstrous pressure. He collected 23 touches, 10 contested possessions, 5 inside 50, 6 clearances, 3 score involvements, 10 tackles, 33 pressure acts, 385 meters gained. And then Brandon Thatcher, upon return from injury, looks solid in defense, finishing with 13 disposals, 12 of them effective, equating to 92.3% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 8 marks, 3 score involvements, 5 pressure acts, 7 1%ers, and 5 spoils. And shout out to debutant Hugh Jackson for Yartapuulti. He collected 8 disposals, 3 contested possessions, 2 clearances, a behind, 3 score involvements, and 6 pressure acts. On the injury front, Cooper Simpson had an AC joint issue. I don't entirely know where that actually is in the body. But if it's
anterior cruciate, it's that shoulder.
Okay, that helps. And it sounded familiar. I just couldn't remember where on the body it was located.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that
so
doesn't mean to spell it.
could be out for a little bit on that one. He's kind of a fringe player kind of position at the moment anyway. He's fairly young. He'll be all right.
It's been good in the last few weeks. As honestly, he's played 3 games this year and he's been pretty solid for all of them. It's a bit of a shame, actually.
Yeah, but it's he'll be back and he'll be strong. I believe. I have some faith. And then if you haven't seen the hit yet, of course, Darcy Byrne-Jones went out with concussion, which will lead directly into my MRO point of Alex Pearce receiving a 3-match ban for the bump. It is being taken to the tribunal to appeal. Yeah. If you haven't seen the incident, it does look like they more make contact, like on shoulders, but because Darcy Byrne-Jones fell backwards rather than forwards, he had no way to kind of protect himself from hitting his head on the ground. And Alex Pearce was too far away to be able to help him or to support him from not hitting his head. So the 3 matches ban is understandable because that's what the precedent has become. Yeah. But I think in this situation, it can definitely be argued it's not entirely Pearce's fault.
I would say it's not Pearce's fault at all. Like, there was nothing that Darcy Byrne-Jones did to protect himself in the slightest. He goes back from the flight of the ball. He runs at an angle to where his body isn't even straight up and down. He's already at that. And then he leaps backwards directly into the path of a player who had right of way to the ball. Like, that was
just, both players had eyes for the ball. Like, they were both vying for the contest.
And there was a bit of talk, especially around my family, but as well, like the Peter Wright incident, where even in that example, and Peter Wright, there wasn't that much he could do. You could argue that Peter Wright was at least late to the contest.
Yeah.
And that's what sort of caused it. Whereas Pearce, like, I don't understand what you're meant to do. Like, I know there's a few things where you sort of roll your eyes. It's like, well, you did commit to a contest that, or you didn't take, like, the correct option. But, as I said, apart from pulling out, which, you're not going to do, like, even then it's a bit hard. Like, he didn't even have that task trying to pull out, even if he wanted to. So,
yeah, because he had eyes for the ball. Both of them did. So, granted, obviously, as a player, you have kind of a sense that someone is going to be around you in most contests. But, what their speed is, what their impact is going to be. Like, you can only react in very split-second moments.
Exactly. And as I said, Darcy Byrne-Jones lined himself in a way that was, like, he was the reckless one. Like, Pearce gets done for reckless, and it's like, like, that was just a standard marking position. Like, if he was flinging arms around or doing this, that, and the other, but you know what I mean? It was just... Anyway, so, fair to say, I think Pearce should just get off. I don't think there's anything. I at least hope he gets 1 week if they're going to give him anything, but 3 is just ridiculous in my mind.
Yeah, I agree.
I know it's precedent and thing, but honestly, if you're going to call anything a football action, like, that's got to be it.
Yeah, 100%. Jumping over to the rest of the MRO reports for this match, Andy Brayshaw was fined $1,000 for attempting to trip Ollie Wines. Rory Atkins was fined $2,000 for rough conduct against Murphy Reed. Neil Erasmus was fined $2,000 for rough conduct against Willem Drew. And then Caleb Sarong was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. We can't escape it, can we?
Neil Erasmus?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
We just can't escape it, can we?
What? Was surprised. Butters, who was chippy, didn't get a fine.
No, neither did Rosie.
Honestly?
Normally those two are kind of up there.
Yeah. Rosie doesn't get fined as much. Butters is the real
really
Butters and Horn Francis. Rosie sort of like half gets in there, half tries to separate. I think because it's captain now, he's sort of less inclined to go in, but he does like to get a bit lippy.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we've covered that match enough. I think we've took a bit of the designated time on that one.
Took a bit of...
sort of
to be fair, there was a bit we had to kind of rant about with Port, but that's okay.
I need to get a bit off my check. I need a bit of therapy in this.
Jumping over to our Sunday games now, over to the better team in South Australia, I might just say.
Yeah.
One of the battles of the birds being Kuwarna versus Waalitj Marawar at the Adelaide Oval.
Yeah, and we mentioned last week, after the win for Waalitj Marawar, we wanted them to show at least a bit of fight and not getting smashed. And we said that it was going to be hard coming off the offensive mind of Kuwarna.
Mm-hmm.
And while it was a 66-point margin in the end, just going through the score, 19-14, 128 Kuwarna, 8-14, 62 Waalitj to Marawar. I don't think, the the game was in reach at halftime. It was within 20 points, and I don't think the Eagles actually did all that badly. I think just it's very hard to start Kuwarna when you don't have the tools to stop their offensive attack.
Agreed.
The Eagles as well were actually I will give credit to Kuwarna's defense. They were offensively denied a lot of opportunities. They only had a modest amount of inside 50s, and they just couldn't convert from their forward half chains. Meanwhile, Adelaide took advantage of their back half movement from the plentiful errors as well. And from the plentiful errors of the Eagles' back half ball movements to end up swallowing them up. That was pretty much the biggest thing. It was not only did the Eagles not have enough backline height to deal with them, they just had so many turnovers coming from the back half. And, it was mainly, unfortunately, Ryan Marich, who otherwise has had a pretty okay season. Cripps had a few turnovers, but I think he overall was still all right. And, Gibney had a few here and there. So, I've only written one note for this game.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there wasn't really all that much to kind of talk about with this one. It's like they contended up to the first half, and then the Crows just blew them out of the water.
Yeah, but I was just going to make a point that I was actually, very impressed with Adelaide's defense because, despite the injury coming to Waterman, I think that happened a bit later in the game. They're always fairly solid because we have seen at times the Eagles, when they have gotten the ball inside 50, have done very well to convert. But I think this is the one time where they actually felt a bit more stifled in their forward line. And, it was again the work of players like Josh Worrell, Max Michaelani had a few moments here and there. And here's the other one. Sorry, I'm capping. Mark Keane.
Yes.
Both of those were absolutely fantastic. And, as I said, Waterman did have a pretty good day, but apart from that, they really found it hard and had to take a lot of scoring options from higher up rather than deep inside their forward 50. So, again, it was just making it a bit hard. But otherwise, as you mentioned, it was a pretty standard Eagles game. Beating a bit in the clearance always puts them on the back foot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just one of those cases where, as I said, it wasn't bad. Their midfield is improving, I will say. Really much. Not really enough to compete with an, developing midfield like Adelaide, but, they didn't feel smashed in this contest, even though it was a bit lopsided. As I said, it just felt like they didn't defensively have enough tools, rather than overall they were structurally deficit.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's not to say that like they're lacking. Well, obviously the Eagles are lacking in a fair amount of areas, but one area they're not lacking in is pressure because. As we've seen like time and again so far this season, Jack Graham, the Fridge, has always been a standout in that midfield because his tackling pressure and it's just on-ball pressure in general is literally what his career has been shaped by. And he's just one of those players who, up until when he did his shoulder injury and kind of lost kind of a lot of confidence in himself to keep going with it, was just one of the best at midfield pressure. And obviously, now we have players that are much more improved in other teams, like Jack Crisp, for an example, like that are able to play at this sort of pressure level consistently. And Fridge is finally at that point. Granted, it had to take a whole new team to do it, where he can play at that consistent tackling pressure level, like pretty much every game, despite the losses and despite like how much the team is lacking around him. Like, and just for note, because he's not in my individuals, but like he had 8 tackles, 29 pressure acts, 8 clearances, 12 contested possessions. Like it's a ton of work in that midfield, and it's only him kind of elevating majority of that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's the flip side of it, is that with the Eagles going with a more aggressive centre bounce, and as I said, Jack Graham hasn't often found himself heavily in the centre bounce rotation. Um, so as I said, he's only really providing pressure in the post clearance work, which again he's been very good at. That's not a knock. That's just where the Eagles are playing him.
Yeah.
But it has meant that in the inside midfield, the pressure just isn't quite there. And that's why I think a lot of teams have a very good rate of turning first possession into a clearance, because the Eagles just probably won't lay a finger on you in that time frame.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Jumping over to the Crows, sorry, I will go through my individuals, starting with Josh Rochelle. He kicked truly up forward, slotting 5 goals from 16 disposals, 5 contested possessions, 3 marks, 4 inside 50s, 9 score involvements, 6 tackles with 5 of them inside 50, 21 pressure acts, and 402 metres gained. As you mentioned earlier, Josh Worrell was immense with ball movement and transition through defence, finishing with 26 touches, 20 effective, equating to 76.9% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 6 marks, 3 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 6 pressure acts, 6 ground ball gets, and 569 metres gained. And then another player in defence that I thought impressed this week was Jordan Butts, who we occasionally mention more as like a collective of that defensive group, but I thought he was really solid individually this week, especially in one-on-ones and contests, finishing with 9 disposals, 8 effective, equating to 88.9% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 7 1%ers, and 7 spoils. Jumping over to the Eagles, co-captain Liam Duggan put in some solid effort with ball movement, collecting 23 touches, 20 effective, equating to 87% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 4 inside 50s, 5 score involvements, 5 pressure acts, and 659 metres gained. And Tyler Brockman's career has essentially been revived now that he's kind of been added into the rotation of centre bounce. He kicked 1-2 from 16 disposals, 10 contested possessions, 5 inside 50s, 4 clearances, 2 goal assists, 6 score involvements, 4 tackles, 19 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, and 7 ground ball gets. Jumping quickly over to injuries. As you mentioned before, Jake Waterman did do an injury late in the game. It was a shoulder. Hopefully it isn't too bad and doesn't rule him out for a while, because they definitely kind of need him, especially with them, messing about a little bit with Oscar Allen. Granted, he's now back in the forward line. He did kick 2 goals this week. But it's just, something to note because he's been a little bit more consistent. And then Tex was managed. I believe he pulled up sore in the warm-up, so he was a late change prior to the game starting.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, even without, it felt like it was a good game to rest Tex, because, they definitely had enough forward line capability. I think when McGovern wasn't announced to be suddenly playing, I think they were like, we could probably rest Tex. I think a 2 tall forward line is probably going to do for this one.
So MRO report has just come in. There's a little bit that I have to go through for this game specifically. There are like 8 players, 9 players fined, maybe 10. So I'm going to quickly run through that.
Oh yeah, there was a melee late,
There was.
Wasn't there?
Yes. I completely forgot about it. So let me quickly run through this. Isaac Rankin was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. Jordan Dawson was fined $1,000 for striking Harley Reid. Debatable if deserved. Liam Baker was fined $3,125 for other misconduct against James Peatling. When they tell
always sinister.
When they write it like that, like it could literally be anything, and it scares me sometimes. And then for the ones that were fined in the melee, Thilthorpe was fined $1,000, Rankin was fined $1,000, Elijah Hewitt fined $1,000, Jack Hutchinson was fined $1,000, Josh Worrell was fined $1,875, Liam Baker was fined $1,875, and Bailey Williams, for his third offence, was fined $3,125.
BJ, he's not sort of this guy you want to see on the street at late at night, starting a fight with someone. So, bit of an off game too. Honestly, the ruck work for the Eagles was pretty terrible. It's another reason why they got such beaten out in the middle.
That's why I didn't really want to mention like Riley O'Brien, because he's not the greatest of ruckmen, but he was also playing against Flynn and BJ, so it's not also really tough competition.
But if you had him in your super coach, 161 points. Not a bad.
Excellent
Probably
choice
like
if you had him in the super coach for sure.
Yeah. I probably wouldn't. I think you're losing in the long term, but it is what it is.
True. All right, jumping back over to Victoria because we're going to the MCG for Naarm versus the Sydney Swans.
Yeah. We both tipped this game, but I think we talked about it. None of us predicted as comprehensively. Well, I wouldn't have predicted Melbourne scoring 131
Yeah, no,
at the very least.
I was not expecting this to be a 53-point blowout.
Yeah, but it was in the areas that you would expect in terms of where Naarm's strength was. I thought that their midfield and defensive performances were the backbone of this, and it did lead to the forward line feast, as Sydney just looked droll in the back half of the field, and it took a bit of forward creativity to even keep them anywhere near this game, because it was an all-round the ground smashing, really. It was weird though, because the clearances were on paper, even overall, but when you're watching the match, even when Sydney won the centre clearance, it wasn't as threatening as Petrarca, Oliver, Gawn, Salem, Rivers, and Pickett were just too much and helped them get a few more players in Naarm's forward line going, as they were 15% more efficient inside 50 than their season average. Obviously one of the struggling teams, but they did look a lot more useful this week, and that was because the efforts up the ground. On the flip side, Naarm dealt with the conventional Sydney attack, once again leaving the mids to try and create moments out of not much as they continue to deal with forward line injuries. We've mentioned that before. The problem is the complete absence of ground level pressure. Sydney had very little ground ball gets in their forward 50. Again, talking about tall players leading the ground ball gets. Grundy actually led the night with 3, and also led with Clayton Cleary with tackles inside 50 with also 3. So Grundy was probably the best small forward of the night, and they were staying 20 to 9 in terms of inside 50 tackles, because Melbourne had complete pressure in their forward line. While I did, say, oh yeah, their forward line was still Melbourne forward line, they were trying very hard. And yeah, they actually benefit. They actually got some reward from it, which was good to see. And yeah, honestly, this was pretty much a failure in all 3 parts of the ground. Again, inside midfields, Sydney were okay. They were lacking a lot from the outside and defensively inside the middle. And as I said, Naarm could put this game to bed after the first quarter. They made more of the opportunities in the second quarter. I think they kicked something like 1 goal 8 or something in that quarter. And yeah, as I said, they could have won the game much earlier and still managed to win the game quite comprehensively. And I want to say the quality of the young Naarm kids are starting to shine brighter than ever. They actually have been good all season, but have sort of been put in the ringer due to the dip of their midfield unit underperforming in those first 5 or 6 games. But now that they're looking good, they look a lot more solid team. If the midfield unit can stay around, Melbourne are back into the finals hunt. And could be at least a serious threat up until the teams in the top 4, I reckon.
Yeah. Sorry to interject, but I completely agree. Okay. I read an article, I think it was yesterday, or it might have been earlier today on my lunch break. I can't remember. But it was just pretty much just outlining the fact that Naarm are playing a very similar kind of way to how Brisbane were at the start of last season. Like they start off slow. Obviously, it had this kind of kind of this dip in effort in the first half. Like Brisbane went 1-5 for note, for if you can't remember. But then like sorted out their issues, and all of a sudden they look like a completely different team. Like they look like the team that kind of existed when they won their premiership in 21.
Yeah, and it's like you don't really think Melbourne as a forward half team, and you think, oh, they're more set up a bit from their back half movement. It requires a bit to get going, but they got 11-10. That's like a very Brisbane 2024 forward half scored line. So at least in this game they got it going. Obviously, I don't think they have the consistency to do that week in, week out. But if they get enough goals from back half, which is what Brisbane didn't quite have as much, They could do at Brisbane. I don't think they're quite that good, but again, I can see the similarities and why you would compare these two. But talking about comparisons, we got to talk about Sydney's depth because it really is putting a strain on setting up their system. We know last year that they weren't tested in this department, and they are probably a bit behind the eight balls with this. You know, we've seen a lot of teams go through injury uninterrupted season, and then the depth players, because they haven't played that much league football, they, struggle when they come back in. Maybe they haven't played for a year and a half. And as I said, and we're just seeing a complete flip in offensive performance. They are pretty much parallels with Carlton, going from one of the best to one of the least efficient teams inside forward 50.
Yeah.
And it just shows how much they needed all their best players in their forward line to function. We're talking obviously about the losses of McDonald, Papley, and Amati, mainly. As even if they don't always score through them, we do see it makes them a bit harder to defend against them while they're there. And as I said, it makes them so really the only thing you got to worry about defensively is making sure your midfielders are responsible. And if you do that, Sydney aren't really much of a threat offensively at all.
Yeah, no, that's right. Because as we've talked about pretty much all season long, Sydney's opportunities up forward all come from their midfield. And as I do mention in my notes, like Isaac Heaney is kind of the big contributor to that. Chad Warner is a big contributor to that. But there isn't really.
They haven't got games defensively.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's
it's all that they've got, and like their defense isn't too bad. Like their defense is like contending still, but it does have holes.
It's shaky.
Yeah. Like they've Frampy being back has been good. Blakey being down there has still been good. They moved what's his face? I'm blanking on names.
Lloyd out of there? Or...
No, the one that was playing forward and they shifted back to defense.
Wicks. Sam Wicks.
No, Wicks isn't who I'm talking about. I'm blanking on the name so much. I know who I'm thinking. I can picture him, but I can't think of the name. But anyway, like they have solid defensive players down there again, which is good. But it's not. No, I'll find it. Give me a second.
I'm not sure if this player exists, Blazy.
Oh no, he definitely does. Just give me one moment.
Might not have played this week. Can't think of who would be out there.
Tom McCartan. There we go. Found him. Don't give me that look. He did play forward, and they pushed him up forward, and then he's gone back into defense.
Oh, at the start of the year. Yeah, I get you. I don't count that.
Unfortunately the stats do, and it makes a difference because like he did provide opportunities up forward, but the defensive leaks require him to be back down there, but it's still not enough.
Exactly
is the issue.
Yeah, and it might have infected his game. He hasn't really been that solid back in defense. They've definitely not been that great against Tolls anyway.
Yeah, like they're very much. As much as Blakey is tall and he does provide a lot, he's kind of the only one that really has that major impact against other talls. They don't really have other opportunities.
And that's sort of one in playing loose anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they need one of those, and it can be Hamling, but now they've forced Hamling into the forward line if Tom McCartan isn't there. So yeah, it just seems a mess.
Yeah, I think Sydney are definitely looking probably at the mid-season draft this week as well. Although I don't know if they actually have a pick. That's something I may have to look into after.
Got someone out for the entire year, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, so if they are, I don't know who they're probably going to target. Probably a forward, I would assume. But it remains to be seen as to how they're going to restructure themselves for this second half.
Okay, now they've got two TBCs. That's Will Edwards and Logan McDonald. So
that's right.
If they do, they're going to have to rule one out for the year.
So yeah, it's just like there's so many holes that they need to fill, and they just don't have the pieces to fill them.
Yeah, and 3 people suspended as well.
That's
So they didn't like do their cause any better last week because
yeah,
then
that's true.
Malikan was already suspended. McInerney, and Amati joined the bench after a couple of undisciplined things. So yeah, I think they only get Amati back next week. I think McInerney's had the longest suspension.
Yeah.
I might
But
have the
anyway,
wrong way around.
let's jump over to the individuals for Naarm. Starting with Cosy Pickett, who pretty much was absolutely dominant in the forward line, despite a little bit of inconsistencies. He kicked 5-4 from 24 disposals, 11 contested possessions, 4 marks, all of them inside 50, 3 inside 50, 6 clearances, 13 score involvements, 4 tackles, with 2 of them inside 50, 14 pressure acts, and 536 meters gained. Jake Lever, upon return from injury, was solid in defense. The Lever-May duo is finally back, finishing with 12 touches, 10 effective, equating to 83.3% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 3 tackles, 10 pressure acts, 5 1%, 5 spoils. Christian Salem was an effective presence pretty much all around the ground. He kicked 1-1 from 31 disposals, 22 effective, equated to 71% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 11 marks, 4 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 12 score involvements, 4 tackles, 14 pressure acts, and 402 meters gained. Brody Grundy just edged out Max Gawn in performance stat-wise. He finished with 41 hitouts, 13 to advantage, and 23 touches, 17 contested possessions, 8 clearances, 5 score involvements, 9 tackles with 3 of them inside 50, 21 pressure acts, and 2 1%ers. And then, as I mentioned earlier, champion Isaac Heaney did provide a lot going through midfield to forward line. He kicked 3 goals from 22 disposals, 16 of them effective, equating to 72.7% efficiency, 12 contested possessions, 4 marks, 4 clearances, 6 score involvements, 6 tackles, 17 pressure acts, and 9 ground ball gets. And then, unfortunately, Sam Wicks has returned to the injury bench with a hamstring. Hopefully it's only a minor strain and he won't be out for too long, but that is rough timing for Sydney.
Yeah, exactly. They really can't afford too many. Like, they just need to find consistency, and you hope they can do that either coming into or just after the bye. But yeah, it's just going to be hard with the players coming in and out at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we literally just talked about it, but like it's what I don't know what we're really going to see from them in this second half, and like you want to hope that there's some sort of steady improvement, but I don't think we're going to get to see it.
No, I can't see them making the 8. But
they definitely won't make the 8 at this point. They just have too many pieces missing. But you want to kind of see them
technically
find some
any
form.
team outside the bottom 3 can make the 8, but realistically, it would take a lot from Port, St Kilda, Sydney. There's another team in the mix. I mean, technically the Bombers, but I do feel like they deserve a bit more props. That's not from disappointment.
Yeah,
Carlton, that's the other one.
Yeah, that's right. Speaking of St Kilda, though, we're going to jump over to our last game of the round over at Marvel Stadium with Euro-Yroke facing up against the Gold Coast Suns.
Yeah, and apart from the head-to-head matchup of the coaching barbs thrown across Marvel Stadium, there was not much excitement to be had in this sleeper match of a Sunday game. The final score ending up being a 8-13-61 for Euro-Yroke, 12-8-80 for the Gold Coast Suns. Gold Coast dominated time of possession, but had mediocre movements and offensive efficiency. Then they crapped the bed after half-time. They would have let Euro-Yroke in the door if they didn't kick 1-6 and leave the game at a tantalising but not realistically close arm's length away. St Kilda, they sort of protected the ball well enough. And their inside midfield offered some decent options and really got involved in transition. But Euro-Yroke just didn't get anything offensively going. The Suns had a bit of a clamp in the defence, especially managed to keep Jack Higgins pretty much a non-influence. Sort of applied to both sides. There was only 15 general play shots for the day, resulting in 7 goals, 5. In terms of the total targets, Gold Coast just had a few more of the better overall targets, as Cooper Sharman would be the only consistent deep threat for the Saints. But that would sort of be cancelled out by Ben Long at the other end anyways. I will say Machido Owens was probably the most involved forward half player, but he only actually had 4 possessions inside 50. He did make a solid mark of them, though, because he scored 2 goals, 2 from them. So every possession inside 50 for him was a scoring shot.
Excellent.
And yeah, as I said, yeah, I would say he was the offensively best player
Yeah, I think so.
for the Euro-Yroke.
Yeah,
But otherwise, yeah, not that much there.
yeah.
Um,
Majority of it was really like a midfield battle more than anything, and as we know, the Suns have a
yeah.
ton of talent in that midfield, and they kind of just ran away with it pretty easily.
I was a run away because again, Saints nullified a fair bit, but you know what I mean. It's just they were good enough to when the moments matters, connect up. And I will say, like, it's why you have such a advantage having a player like Ben Long,
Mm.
especially when Ben King has a bit of a quiet game. Uh, having someone like him bowl up there was really good. Yeah, there's not too much to say. But the Saints, they've had a lot of good performances by their veterans this year. They're actually one of the teams where, honestly, their best four players have not dropped off production wise.
Mm.
But I got a feeling like some of their kids are starting to run out of a little steam, and you could probably see a few more mid-season rotations. Whether that's before or after the bye, maybe give one of the kids a bit of some of the kids a bit of a run through the VFL for what is it, Sandringham for the Saints? I can't quite
Yes, it is
remember.
Sandringham for the Saints.
Yeah. But on the flip side, and this is where the Suns are looking really good, they have made the most of their depth players. And these are not like some of the younger players. These are like players that are sort of mid-age, something that's often being criticized. They're players like 25 to 30, not producing enough for their age bracket.
Mm-hmm.
But in this game specifically, and for the last 3 weeks, players like Joel Jeffries, Brain Fiorini, and Ben Ainsworth all contributed solidly. And in a match where a fair few players of the Suns just sort of struggled, it did provide enough core group of good players. Like Saints probably had 4 really good players that match. Suns probably had about probably 7 or 8 solid players. And in a game like this where nothing that much is going offensively for either team, it provides just enough edge for the Suns to win comfortably.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like, I'm pretty much just gonna go straight into it. Like, it all was very solidly thanks to Matt Rao. He was absolutely dominant in the midfield this week. He finished with 24 disposals, 19 of them effective, according to 79.2% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 4 marks, 6 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 15 tackles, 44 pressure acts, and 404 meters gained. He was an absolute menace on ball. Like, which is, normally on par, but like, the fact that he was leading tackler for this round
Mm.
with 15, and I'm pretty sure leading pressure factor as well at 44. Like, that's
Yeah.
huge from him.
So he was only 1 tackle behind in front of Ned Long.
That's right.
Um, in terms of for the round, but in terms of pressure act, he was 11 above Willem Dreary, who, as we've already mentioned, had a fantastic pressure game. Who was the next best, so that's quite a big step up.
It's yeah, and considering he's more known for his clearance, like the fact that he played a little bit more on ball rather than clearance output is great.
Yeah,
Like that's
we saw him
something
do
that
that
Dimmer
early
really
in
loves,
last
is
year.
players that can like kind of
Mm.
shift positions but still play a same
Yeah,
style that they're already kind of doing.
yeah, he plays aggressively, but there is a mode where he can go where he's still providing enough in those disposals and clearances, but he's really just ramping on pressure on the opposition.
Yeah, he is. Jumping over to Jared Witts, who completely dominated Rowan Marshall, at least in the ruck. They were fairly even around the ground, getting 49 hitouts, 15 of them to advantage, and 12 touches, 10 of them effective, equating to 83.3% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 6 clearances, 6 tackles, 12 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 3 spoils. And then Captain Noah Anderson was immense with ball movement and transition for the Suns, collecting 36 disposals, 26 effective, equating to 72.2% efficiency, 14 contested possessions, 5 marks, 7 inside 50s, 11 clearances, 6 score involvements, 10 pressure acts, 10 ground ball gets, and 719 meters gained. For the Saints for Euro-Yroke, Nasiah Wanganeen Miller stepped up massively, kicking 1-1 from 36 touches, 7 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 3 inside 50s, 6 score involvements, 4 tackles, 3 1%ers, 3 spoils, and 902 metres gained. Absolutely huge from him this week. And then Mitch Owens was outstanding as well, up forward, as you had mentioned, slotting 2-2 from 25 disposals, 19 effective, equating to 76% efficiency, 12 contested possessions, 8 marks, 8 inside 50s, 3 clearances, 2 goal assists, 10 score involvements, 8 grab ball gets, and 428 metres gained. Pretty much, kind of the same stuff we've kind of already been talking about for St Kilda, is that there's definitely holes that they need to fill. They're still very much missing Max King. But the fact that Cooper Sharman, for note, I didn't mention him in here, he kicked 3-3 this week. He was very solid, despite kind of not having the same sort of output that Mitch Owens did as he pushed further up the ground. The Saints have options, but they're still not as consistent as they should be. Granted, their creativity has helped massively, especially from Jack Higgins, but Jack Higgins being kept really quiet this week definitely did not help in that regard.
That hurt a lot, yeah. I mean, as you can, there's pretty much no ground level player for St Kilda that scored a goal just looking through. I don't think there was any. Depends if you want to call Sinclair and Steele ground level, but I'm talking more pure in the forward line.
Yeah, there wasn't really anything up forward on that ground level because of Higgins being completely nullified.
Mind you, it seemed like they were rotating a lot of people from the half forward flank to the wing, so
True.
It might have just been their setup anyway. But a very Saints game. Not putrid, but definitely a bit too reliant on a small set of players. As I said, they sort of struggle against good teams in terms of forms and structure. That's when the inefficiencies of playing some of the young players in middling positions start to catch up on you.
Yeah, agreed. Just on the injury front, Mac Andrew did do a brief ankle injury. I don't entirely know where this happened in the game. It might have been early, it might have been late. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think it's too bad. So hopefully he'll be all right after probably a week or two rest. Jumping over quickly to MRO, because I forgot to do MRO for the last game as well, so I will cover that after this. But Marcus Windhager was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. Another one, angry. And then jumping back over to Naarm versus the Sydney Swans. Christian Petrarca was also fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. I feel like he's someone who should know better. But however, Callum Mills will be suspended for 1 match for rough conduct against Charlie Spargo.
Yeah, that was just a very careless and high hit. That was a definite 1 week deserved. Don't think it will change.
Fair enough. Nothing's been announced about them, going to the tribunal for it.
Oh, normally that'll be tomorrow.
So they should be. Games, so. Oh yeah, true. But yeah, no. If it's as it was, then I think one match is fair. There was clearly no secondary effect from the hit for Spargo. So as long as that's all right.
No, it was just high and unnecessary. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
And another player, and one that just come in, mind you, going right out, just suspension. It adds to the rotation of players.
That it does. Sorry, I was just bringing the ladder up because it's been a couple of weeks since we last looked at the ladder, so I figure it would be time to briefly cover it again. So top 3 hasn't really changed all that much. Collingwood now half a game ahead, in first position. Brisbane sitting second, only half a game behind at 34. Sorry, Collingwood are on 36. The Gold Coast Suns sitting at 32 points. Again, a game behind Collingwood, half a game behind Brisbane. Fourth, pretty much the rest of the top 8 has shifted a little bit, with Adelaide coming in at 4th position on 28 points, edging just past Geelong, also sitting at 28 points purely by percentage. Hawthorn dropped down to 6th, also on 28 though, but again, percentage gets them out of the top 4. The Western Bulldogs are now down to 7th, also on 24 points, whereas the Giants are now in the 8th once more, sitting also on 24 points. Going down into the rest of the ladder, 9th and 10th Fremantle and Essendon also on 24 points. Melbourne are now on 20 points, sitting at 11th, having jumped up a couple of positions. Carlton, Sydney, and St Kilda join Port Adelaide on 16 points, rounding out 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. And then rounding out the rest, 16th, 17th, and 18th is Richmond. North Melbourne separated by only half a game. And the West Coast Eagles, of course, with their singular win at 18th.
Yeah. Not much to say. As I said, it's one of those things where you still think that, honestly, you think 8th is really the spot up to grab. I think the top 7 are very unlikely to change unless something unexpected happens. But there are a lot of teams going for that 8th spot, so it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I think it might be another logjam, but I don't think it'll extend as high as it did last year.
Oh, I think it's raining outside. Well, my end, not your end. That could be your end. I don't know.
Could be
Definitely
one
my
very
end.
long cloud.
But anyway, let's jump over to the round ahead. The first round of the bye rounds. I believe there is 5 in this segment. 12, 13, 14, 15, and I think 16 as well. So it's an interesting split. I thought they might have only done it as 4 rounds, but they've essentially got it split as 4 teams, 2 teams, and 4, 4, 4. So we'll go through that slowly and as the weeks go on. But starting Thursday night, Brisbane and Essendon up at the Gabba.
Yeah, I mean, I would like Essendon to put a good shake at it if they had all their players and this, that, and the other. But I mean, really talking about scraps for the Lions. You know what I mean? They're just, I mean, they're pretty much a corpse at this rate. I think the Dons have just got to contain the midfield.
Yeah.
If they do that, I mean, force the ball forward, try and get a bit on ground. They can at least maybe muck around with them. Again, we've seen Brisbane haven't really put the boots to the throats of many teams, but yeah, you just expect Essendon to have enough turnovers for Brisbane to kick what they normally have. This will be probably an aggressive margin. I wouldn't quite put it to the stakes of 50 or 40, but it wouldn't be that far off.
Yeah, I expect Brisbane to pretty much kick away fairly convincingly, especially with the lack of tall defenders. I think on ground, they'll handle Brisbane's smaller forward line fairly well, but I think the height is definitely going to be a massive issue. So you're right in the fact that containing that midfield, that insanely strong midfield from Brisbane, is going to be the number one key point for Essendon to barely have a chance.
Yeah, because they're not going to defend and match up. So if they can at least limit the inside 50s, get Brisbane moving more from the back half, they might be able to at least make a respectable effort of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Jumping over to our Friday night game at the MCG, it is Collingwood and Hawthorn, another battle of the birds.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. A lot of good matchups in recent history. Last 3 games have been 2-3 in favour of Hawthorn. Hawthorn by 66 last year.
Mm-hmm.
Collingwood by 5 the year before that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Collingwood by 5 earlier in the same year.
Oh, yeah.
And then in 2023, there was that minor upset where Hawthorn won by 32 in Collingwood's premiership year.
That's right.
So, form-wise, there's some reason you would back in Hawthorn. Recent history time, I mean, it's sort of hard. Again, Collingwood don't dominate the clearances, but they dominate the inside movement.
They do.
So this could be a game where Hawthorn actually come back into it after struggling a bit in terms of the pure clearance battle.
Yeah.
It's just hard with Collingwood's defense, though, because we saw, I mean, unless Kal Shadir comes back as an instant impact, we've seen Gunston off a tiny bit, so he would have to have a pretty good game. It would take a lot. It would have to take almost all of Hawthorn's forward line to fire, and they haven't in the last 3 weeks. So that's like two areas where they would have to be pretty tight knit, and
Yeah.
I think that's a bit too much when you're talking about Collingwood. Whereas I said, Collingwood are fairly even around the ground. They're first for a fairly good reason. I don't think it'll be smashing. It might even be close, but I would imagine it'll be like Collingwood by 20.
Yeah, I expect Collingwood to 100% take the victory here. However, I can also see Hawks definitely learning a bit more from last week and trying to tighten up in a little bit of areas, especially on matchups. Hopefully try and get some more out of the Wizard and Ginnivan. However, there's feels like a lack of cohesion in their defense a little bit, despite the fact that we've talked at length about how strong, like individually, their defense is. So I think players like Marachek, like Bobby Hill, who should be back this week, would just be able to Jamie Elliott, of course, will just be able to just run amok in that forward line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and as I was going to say, like the points against for Hawthorn, I haven't been able to sort out the ladder. How do you do it? Anyway, our points against, they're only fairly middle of the pack. Not the worst defense, but definitely not as restrictive as some of the better defenses in the league.
Yeah.
Collingwood, Gold Coast, all a bit above them. Probably still edging towards top 5, but I'd probably put them maybe 6th, 7th in terms of best defense in the league.
Their defensive efforts feels like it's only, I think, because of the additions of Battle and Barras as to where they've kind of lost a bit of how they were defensively last season or towards the end of that last season. So it's just, I think they're still not necessarily trying to find the right players in the right spots. I think they have. It's just like those little bits of miscommunication where they let something slip and it just kind of falls apart briefly.
Yeah, and as I said, they've just shifted towards, again, going all in and being an aerially dominated team. But again, like Collingwood last week, they don't really care about that because they're just so good with the handball chains. So again, unless a lot of things click, I'd be definitely leaning towards Hawthorn.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, jumping over to our Saturday matchups. There are only 3 on Saturday this week. Going up to the Gold Coast at People First Stadium, it's the Suns taking on Fremantle.
Yeah, this will be an interesting game. Again, two fairly... Well, I'd say in the last few weeks, Fremantle's been defensively, not so much the whole year. Where the Suns obviously have been one of the best defensive teams in the competition. And yeah, as I said, this will be a really good litmus test for Fremantle. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, Fremantle have gotten their ground game going. Technically, that's probably where the Suns are a bit less dominant in terms of defending smalls, but still really good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
100%.
You know, there's not many teams that I think specialize in defending small forwards in the league. You know, maybe like a GWS have that like depth of defense, maybe a Carlton, but yeah, as I said, Sun's still pretty good. So it'll be interesting to see if the Fremantle can convert in that forward half. The midfield battle will be really interesting. I can see actually Gold Coast winning it, but I think Fremantle can do just enough. I mean, it could be like similar to the ball game where they may not directly win the clearances, but they'll get a bit more out of them.
Yeah, I think genuinely, despite on paper, this really looking more like a Suns victory. I think Freo could 100% like make it a hard contest for them and really nullify a lot of their ball movement in that midfield.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, as I said, in the forward line as well, you know, it'll be interesting to see who matches up on Ben Long. And this will actually come with who they replace Cooper Simpson. They could bring someone like Draper, who's been a bit out of form. Or if they want, they could actually, depending on who Gold Coast play, they could even bring back Oscar McDonald as that bigger body defender. I know he plays a bit more off halfback, but you know what I mean. Just extend that.
Someone to kind of run with, kind of match up on.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, you know, as I said, they'll be interesting because again, I think that's the underrated bit about the Suns is that Ben Long is such a hard matchup because again, I always joke, you know, he's either the tallest small forward or the smallest tall forward in the competition. And it just makes it so hard because like, well, do you try and nullify the speed or do you try and take away the marking ability? But yeah, as I said, if anyone can do it, I think Fremantle actually has some good matchups. So they could actually stifle Geelong, Gold Coast in their forward line. And because there's less amount of games, I'm going to put in my weird prediction of the week. Fremantle will keep Gold Coast under 75 points.
Okay, that's an
Which is
interesting.
bold.
That is
when
bold.
they're at home.
That is absolutely bold. Because in comparison to the Lions have really struggled to win at home so far this season, whereas the Suns have been pretty even, both home and away.
Yeah.
So
I would say struggle to win at home. They've just dropped a few. They've only got 3 losses, haven't they?
Yeah, but like I'm pretty sure they've all been at home. That's not ideal.
They haven't scored that much at home. I think you're right there.
True. No, you know what? I accept that. I accept that bold claim. Because I think it will be very hotly contested. This could potentially be a match of the round.
Yeah. I mean, I'd still probably give it to Hawthorn Collingwood, but
true.
Yeah, it's a good sleeper match.
Jumping over
than everything else on offer.
Yeah, true. Jumping over to New South Wales because there are 2 games in Sydney this week. Oh, sorry, on Saturday. No games in Victoria or anywhere else besides the Gold Coast. Starting with the Giants and Richmond at NG Stadium.
Yeah, and again, the Giants were solid, still struggling a bit with injury, still a bit dour, or not dour, but touch and go with the back half movement. And Richmond, they're trying, and I think like GWS isn't really the team that would blow Richmond out the water.
Maybe not this year's GWS,
attacking hard.
But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, like attacking's just gonna be so hard, and like I couldn't imagine Richmond scoring all that much. Despite the last 2 years, Richmond have scored really well against them. 2023, they scored 16-14. 2024, 12-12. Which has surprised me a little bit.
Oh yeah, I think that might have been one of the earlier matchups. I can't remember how was it earlier or was it a late matchup?
July, round 18.
Oh, okay, so it was a fairly late matchup. Yeah, we had some pieces back at that time, so it makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, I just want to look at the play stats now. Small detour here.
No, go for it.
Who kicked the goals for Richmond? Steely Green kicked 3. Leading goal kicker. Ryan Mansell, Jacob Kaczynski, Shai Bolton kicked 2 apiece, and the rest were all singles.
Not too bad.
There's more widespread of goal kickers.
A little bit of variety there. That's not too bad at all. I still expect the Giants to very much win convincingly, especially on a defensive front. We won't have Bolter, so we won't really have an ideal matchup on Jesse Hogan. So we're gonna have to really try and contend with intercept on that part. We'll have Dan Curvis back, so he will be able to fill that sort of hole in defense as he floats back as he normally does. But the hard part is gonna be our young minuscule forward line going up against the absolute wall of Himmelberg, Buckley, and Taylor.
I don't think defensively matchup wise. I think body per body. Like again, you think Hogan would do enough to, probably kick maybe 2 or 3 goals minimum. Well, not minimum.
Well, actually, hang on.
Expected 2 or 3 goals.
If we're lucky, if the timing has worked out, which I think it might have, we should have Lynch back to be able to at least take on the number 1 defender in that regard. So at least gives us a little bit of opportunity, but that's still going to be a tough ask.
Oh yeah, and like as I said, I've moved on from Richmond's forward line. I just think that's a loss anyway.
Yeah, 100%.
But I think in the back line, I think you can actually minimize. Like as I said, I think Giants will have just a few creative moments of scoring, but I don't think they'll emphatically beat Richmond here. It would be a ugly-ish 20-point margin.
Yeah, it could be. I think there's definitely some merit in that. Jumping over to the SCG now, where we have another battle of the birds with Sydney and the Adelaide Crows.
And we saw what Adelaide's defence did against St Kilda, even if they didn't get Adelaide against St Kilda, Adelaide against West Coast. And honestly, Sydney's forward line are turning into West Coast territory at the moment. So yeah, let's go forward line. It's too bad. I don't know why I'm ragging on them, but what I'm trying to say is, I think Sydney are going to get spanked.
Yeah,
their
that's one way
back
to put
line,
it.
I don't think has the matchups for a free-pronged forward. If Taylor Walker does make the trip, I'm not sure whether he's going or taking back-to-back. Maybe he took last week off to play this week. I'm not sure how they're managing him, but regardless, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, I think the damage is already there. Defensively, Adelaide have enough run with James Peatling, Isaac Cumming, and even Alex Neil-Bullen. He's fairly... Oh, sorry, not Alex Neil-Bullen. Dawson.
Yes.
Even Dawson is reasonably responsible defensively. So I think it's harder for their midfielders to just drift up. And then, as I said, their forward line against the defence I already mentioned. So yeah, again, it's another 3 aspects of the ground. I can't really see Sydney winning any of them. So I really do not rate them in this competition.
Yeah, I think the Crows are just too good around the ground, pretty much in all 3 major areas. It's just gonna push past Sydney like a breeze. And granted, it's not a huge fault of Sydney necessarily in their structure. It's just their injuries have really taken a toll in being able to do anything about their structure.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It's as I said, they're not. They've taken a weird time to find their feet, especially after the grand final. But that's sort of just where they are. They're sort of readjusting, and add the fact that they're dealing with more than an average injury list. And it's just all. Yeah, it's not a good part of the season for the Swans.
Pretty much. All right, jumping over to our Sunday matches, and we're going to a place that we don't really see all that often, maybe once or twice a year, and this is TIO Traeger Park over in Alice Springs, where Melbourne will host St Kilda. If you go back into the history of Melbourne's time playing here, you would definitely consider them favourites. However, if you flash back to last year, where they got absolutely spanked by Fremantle, that could possibly weigh up as a decision. However, they are up against the Saints. As we already know, the Saints are very inconsistent. Melbourne have finally found some good footing in their playstyle and how they want to be structured. They finally got their midfield back on the right terms again. You would like to hope that they put on a pretty solid performance here.
Yeah, and it's really going to be a battle of defenses, offenses going up against defenses, because I think both defenses can have a good footing in this match. St Kilda can probably provide a bit more restriction than what Sydney's defense could that week. And midfield battle, you're probably edge towards Melbourne in the inside. St Kilda should have enough ball movement on the outside. I don't think Melbourne really restrict teams travelling coast to coast. But yeah, as I said, it's all about, can St Kilda do something when the ball goes inside 50? And, as I said, Melbourne were defensively solid last week. Again, they almost sort of let Sydney's forwards walk in, because, as I said, they were just far enough ahead where it really didn't matter.
Yeah, that's right.
So, again, I really think that, in terms of the deep entries, they'll probably struggle. It's going to take a really big game by Sharman and Owens. And, if they had played absolutely lights out, this might actually be a fairly close contest. But, there's just too many avenues where I can see Melbourne winning. Again, probably relatively comfortable. Don't think it will be a blowout just because it is at Traeger. I think there'll be a lot of turnovers. That might actually provide a way for St Kilda to score. But I think overall, Melbourne's just got a bit more around the ground depth. And St Kilda are just streaky.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think Melbourne should definitely win
Mm,
comfortably. And yeah, it's going to be like a defensive to mid to forward battle across both ends. Because Sharman and Owens will likely have to match up against Lever and May. And on the other side, we'll have, whilst Melbourne don't really still have that like tall defensive matchup. Like the St Kilda's defense is going to have to deal with Pickett. They're going to have to deal with Disco Turner. They have a bunch of
mm,
players that are going to have to like try and wrangle essentially because we know Pickett can do pretty much anything.
yeah. What's interesting is like, does Disco Turner go back in the forward line? Because he played defense last week and did pretty solid. But
Yeah, he's been
I
doing a bit
think
of floating, which is
tolls,
interesting.
playing three tolls against St Kilda, I don't think it's that necessary. So I think you're right. He might actually find his way back in the forward line. Might just be go by feel, but yeah, adds a bit more versatility to Melbourne though.
Yeah, it does. All right, jumping over to our last game of the round. Over in the West, back at Optus Stadium, it is West Coast hosting the Cats. And how much of a blowout do you think this one's going to be?
Hmm. Yeah, one person that does appreciate this matchup is Jeremy Cameron. Last two games, last three games, 26-12, 168,
Mm-hmm.
Geelong, 21-10, 136,
Mm-hmm.
19-17, 131. So it's gone bigger each time. So Geelong might score over 170 this match. Not going to put that in my wild predictions, but like
It is
honestly,
feasible.
I would be surprised if they scored under 100. West Coast aren't going to score over 100. Geelong might let them score like 85. Like Geelong like to play free flowing rather than defend strictly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if they do have that matchup on that terms, it will be a big combined total game.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, as I said, I'm not really thinking West Coast has much of a chance. Um, Again, because Geelong aren't a good clearance. Sorry, not a direct clearance team.
Mm-hmm.
West Coast will probably want to get a bit more from the center clearance. Try and get a bit more ball going forward. Try and capitalize on movement. But yeah, defensively, I just don't really see all that much. McGovern, no real news on if he's back. If he is, puts it a bit in his favor, but they're still going to struggle. Because it's like Shannon Neal being in a bit of form. Even if McGovern goes on Jeremy Cameron, which I don't think he will.
No, if
You know what I
McGovern comes
mean? It's
back, he'll
like,
probably go on Neil 100%.
yeah, as I said, but as I said, it still leaves Neal. And then as I said, you've got to put like a Harry Edwards or someone like that on someone, and then you've got to deal with the ground level game of Geelong. Yeah, it's just so
Yeah,
many avenues to score for such a weak defense.
that's just gonna be an absolute,
Yeah.
absolute game. I don't know how else to
Yeah,
word it. It's just gonna be a
again,
game.
Eagles, shut your eyes. You're like, defense, we're not going to worry too much about you this week. Let's just focus on seeing if we can get a free flowing game offensively against a team that can probably allow it. I
Yeah,
think that's the thing. And maybe that comes, so when next time you have a closer matchup against a less offensively threatening team, you might make your most of your moments going the other way.
yeah, pretty much. Just to top it all off, the teams that have the bye for this week are Carlton, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide, and the Western Bulldogs. If that wasn't obvious as to the teams that we had already spoken about.
Hmm.
And that brings us to the end of the episode. There isn't really much else we need to wrap up on. Sir Doug Nicholls Round always is a cherished and loved time in the AFL sphere. It always is interesting to see the Guernseys, of course, from all 18 teams. I'm hoping that maybe for like next season we get some more teams that kind of go back into the sort of Indigenous history. Maybe rename for the rounds as per some of the teams. Obviously, get some new logos as well. That would be really cool to see. Obviously, it's all at the team's discretion. Like, I mean, the AFL could probably force them to do it, but I don't think they will. You know, it'd be nice to see a little bit more inclusion. Like I know Richmond, for an example, have deep Indigenous roots, so
Mm,
it'd be nice to see them maybe kind of lean into it a little bit more. But you know,
mm,
that's up to them, really.
yeah.
But yeah, that brings us to the end of episode 60 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast. Thank you all so much for coming to hang out, coming to watch, listen, vibe, liking, and subscribing on both platforms. We always appreciate that. If you want to go see, obviously, our previous social posts and a social post this week, they'll always be up on the Coast to Coast podcast Instagram and TikTok. I kind of stopped using some of the other platforms because either I lost the logins or I'm just getting no traction on that. But that's whatever. We're primarily active on the Instagram, so please go check that out. If you want to go see what I am up to for this week, please go check out my socials. Streaming should be back roughly to normal for this week for me, so that'll always be on my socials if you want to go see when I'm live and stuff like that. Um, Otherwise, yeah, we're looking forward to the buy rounds. We might do a couple little puzzles and things just towards the end of the episodes and or like as bonus episodes just to like
Mm,
make better use of the extra time that we have during these buy rounds. But we will obviously let you all know if those happen. But until
yeah.
then, we will love you all and leave you all. Hope you all have a great week, of course, and we will see you all next week for episode 61. So until then, take care.